So in the coming days, I will invite President Biden to the Oversight Committee to provide his testimony and explain why his family received tens of millions of dollars from foreign companies with his assistance. We need to hear from the president himself. And I assure the American people that they will be able to evaluate for themselves the president's honesty and fitness for the office he now holds.
How do we understand?
That's just simply not true, but go ahead.
I'll yield to the chairman if you want to take some more time.
No.
Well, you can use your
Are you
time.
saying the bank statements are Russian disinformation, that the Bidens took $9,000 from
Oh, I
China?
agree you've been talking about
Tony
bank
Bobulinski
statements for
said
more
it
than a
was
year, but they don't show anything other than there was no crime.
So
Well,
it's
what do your bank
okay. It's
statements
okay
show?
for, as Tony Bobulinski said, for China to bribe Joe Biden's family with $9 million.
But that's the lie that's been discredited. I mean, where is your impeachment investigation? If Joe Biden took a $9 million bribe from China, why aren't you impeaching him for that?
Well, who says we're not?
Well, I can invite Mr. Moskowitz to come back in. Do you want to move for impeachment today? Because I thought that was your main agenda item. You said it was the paramount priority of the committee.
No, this is a hearing on China, and you all have an obsession with Russia and Trump. It's disturbing.
We can talk
you
about
need
China
therapy.
and Trump or Russia
you all
and Trump.
Need,
He's
you
got
need therapy, Mr. Raskin.
No. You need therapy. You're the one who's involved with the deranged politician, not me, okay? I've divorced myself from Donald Trump a long time ago. You're the one who needs to disentangle from that situation. And I will tell you this. If you believe that it would have been illegal for Joe Biden to take $5 million from Ukraine, it certainly would have been. What do you think about Donald Trump taking more than $5 million from the Chinese government while he was president?
Well, we know that Donald Trump had a legitimate business that he talked about and he campaigned on.
The legitimate business was the White House.
What business?
He sold the White House.
Oh, give me a break.
He was
what business was what business were the Bidens in? Well, what business did Joe Biden's family own? What business were they in? Did they have hotels? Did they have a social media company? Did they have golf courses? Did they have casinos? Did they have office buildings?
Mr. Chairman.
What business? Did they have an energy
Mr.
company?
Chairman, we've spent tens of millions of dollars pursuing
Joe
Biden, and you have not
true.
identified
that
a single
lie.
crime.
You are
Really?
lying. That
Really?
is a lie. We have not spent $10 million.
Hey, how much have you spent?
We haven't spent hardly anything.
Oh, it's been for free. Okay. All right. Well, in any event, you know what? Then we get what we paid for because you got nothing. You got nothing on Joe Biden.
No. Answer
You've
this
not
question.
named a
Answer
single
this
crime.
question.
No,
what did the Bidens do? What business were they in? Why did they get
can I answer that?
millions and millions of dollars?
Well, no, I would like to ask you a question.
No, you start. What did the Bidens do?
I don't know
what
who you're
business
talking
were they
about.
in?
Well, what business is the Comers in? You're talking about lots of people. There's lots of people in the family.
I'm a farmer.
Your
I have land. I
your
lease land.
impeachment
I sell
investigation must identify
did
a
the
high
Bidens
crime
do?
and misdemeanor.
What did they do?
I'll
for
tell
the
you what Joe
millions of
Biden did. He was a senator of the United States. Then he wrote a book, and he said he made the most money he ever made in his life, millions of dollars on his book, and he gave $1 million
That's
away
what
to
his
charity.
family did. That's
what
why Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Romania, China, Russia, that's why they paid the Biden family money, because of Joe Biden.
None of those governments paid anyone any money.
Somebody needs therapy here, but it's nobody on our side of the aisle, okay?
Enough.
No,
Back to the
honestly,
China hearing. Back to the China
you
hearing.
had your chance.
Order,
I would like my time restored.
No, your time was
I would
expired.
like you interrupted me. I want my time
you
restored.
had your time. You went above, and I let Ms. Thornton go a minute.
You know what?
Here, sit down, everybody. Come back. This is about China. We asked a simple question. No, Ms. Presley, you're out of order. Sit down.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
can I make a motion that we take a break for 5 minutes?
We're going to keep going. We'll let the record show that Mr. Raskins could not answer the question.
First of all,
what did the Bidens do to receive the money?
Let me start with this. My last name is Raskin, okay? We've sat next to each other for more than a year. You don't have to add the S. Number two, I would like my time restored. And number three,
No, you have
not
time. You're
identified
out
a
of
single
order.
crime.
No.
Well, what is the crime that you want to impeach Joe Biden for and keep this nonsense going?
Well,
Why? What is the crime? Tell America right now. You
Well,
can have the rest of
you're
my
about
time.
to find out.
What
very
is the
soon.
crime?
You're about to find out
Name
very
it.
soon. Chair
That we
now
inhabit
recognizes
a
Mr.
propaganda
Biggs from
experiment.
Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Captain Fennell, you've testified about the national security community's failure to recognize and combat the CCP threat. How has the U.S. intelligence community fallen prey to influence by the CCP?
Well, Chairman Comer, in my experience in the IC, what we had was this, and I mentioned it before, this threat deflation. That's a creation of my co-author and I, but the message behind it is that we were getting information about China and we were seeing things happen, but because of this kind of overriding engagement policy that we've had as a nation towards China since the opening up of, to China, there was this idea that if we engage with them, that they would change their behavior at some point in time. And because of that mindset that permeated Washington and our institutions, the IC became ensnared with that. And so they were less likely to make the connections to see what was happening. And I have examples. For instance, we saw what happened at 2012 at Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. We couldn't believe that China was going to take sovereign territory from a treaty ally.
Right.
In 2013 to 2015, they started dredging up sand to build these 7 artificial islands, 3 of which are the size of Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And they did that, but the IC was reluctant to call that out until it was so painfully obvious.
Right.
And we did that over and over and over again, over decades, over various programs, not just in the naval arena, across the board.
Mr. Bethel, you testified that the CCP has infiltrated top levels of international institutions. Could you explain why China's influence at the World Bank and other international institutions matters to American security?
Well, I addressed some of that earlier in my remarks to the congressman, but consider that U.S. taxpayer money is being funded to an institution that is getting people out of poverty, and at least while I was there, one of the preeminent recipients of money was China. And it would then leverage having a developing country status to gain advantage in other multilateral institutions like the World Trade Organization and the Universal Postage Union.
Do you remember roughly how much American tax dollars we're talking about here?
It's a complex question.
Right.
Because we have something. It's a very complex question, which I can take offline with you. But we have effectively backstopped the institution, or at least our share of it, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars.
Right. Very good. Ms. Cassell, who is the CCP targeting when it engages in elite capture? I know you've mentioned that a little bit. Let's get it into perspective here.
It's a complex answer because they're not targeting a single type or class of individuals. They have a very, very large United Front operation and affiliated organizations who target everything from our political class, state, local, and federal, to our top CEOs, to our chairs of boards of directors, universities, think tanks, business chambers. It's a long list, sir.
So what role does the State Department play in protecting American businesses from CCP influence and becoming so-called corporate hostages? What role does it play, or should it play?
I think the State Department, as I outlined in my written testimony, has a number of tools to inform and educate all of those groups that I just mentioned, sir. And I think also even something like consular affairs, right, where they are issuing travel warnings. I just saw, just to give you an example, the other day, there's a Wall Street research firm, who's, I won't mention, who's advertising for U.S. investors to go with them to China. I believe that's a dangerous thing. And why do we allow it? Well, we can't ban people from going to China, but I think it's incumbent for the safety and security of Americans to inform them of the risks. That's just one small example.
Well, based on your testimony today and the many briefings we've had with federal agencies, it really doesn't seem that there's a cohesive government-wide strategy to combat the CCP influence in American communities. So Do you believe we have an effective government-wide strategy in place?
Not yet, but it took us,
So-
how many decades did it take us to have an effective strategy against the Soviets? It took us a long time as a democracy. My concern is that we don't have the luxury of time to.
And you agree that we should have a strategy?
We
What would that look like,
well,
in your
we'd have
opinion?
to have another hearing on that, sir.
Well, we probably will, because obviously, we take this very seriously. We understand the threat, and we sincerely want to address this issue. And my time has expired, but I'll say this, I think this has been a very substantive hearing. Obviously, we have very credible witnesses here today, and hopefully, we will continue this issue. This is a priority for the House Oversight Committee for the majority. We want to work with the minority. There are certain members that I think had very substantive questions, and there were some that regurgitate their usual animosity towards the former president. But at the end of the day, I think that we can come together in a bipartisan way to try to address this situation. It begins by making certain that our government agencies know and understand the CCP threat, and I don't believe they do. In 2 hearings, I don't believe we have a single government agency that truly understands the threat and has a plan to alleviate that threat. So hopefully we can continue these hearings and come together as a Congress and make effective change. So in closing, I want to thank our witnesses again for your testimony today. And with that, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you. And Administrator, I want to thank you for the work that you and FEMA did in my district a few years ago after the tornadoes in West Kentucky. I want to publicly say that. With respect to the text message behind me, how did you receive the text message? Did you know about it before it became public, or was it brought to your attention before the media made public with it?
It was brought to my attention on November 7th while I was in North Carolina with my leadership team checking in on recovery. It was mentioned to me that they had heard that there was a text message that a staff member had sent. I then directed my team to look into this. This was before the media inquiry or the media story came out. They reviewed it and looked into it on the 8th. They contacted me on November 9th. They showed me the text message. I still had not seen any media stories, and I directed the termination of the employee because it violates the way we conduct business.
And you've testified that you believe this was an isolated incident. Why should we believe that this is an isolated incident and not part of a pattern in FEMA? Because we've seen many other government agencies that we believe have become politicized and or weaponized. So, I mean, why should we believe this is an isolated incident?
Chairman, I understand your concern and I share your concern because I want to ensure that the American people know that FEMA is there to support all people, which is why we are conducting an investigation and why we have asked the IG to look into this further to ensure that this is not beyond the one employee who sent this message. It is not indicative of the rest of our workforce and it is completely unacceptable.
So, I want to go back to Ms. Washington. You terminated her. She was a part-time employee. If she were a full-time FEMA employee, could you have terminated her then and there on the spot?
We definitely have more flexibility within our intermittent employee HR practices, but we would have been able to take the necessary action to remove her until a full investigation had been done.
So, how likely would it have been that her termination would have been overturned because she would have been a full-time civil servant and been protected by the civil servant merit laws, tenure laws, whatever you want to call it?
Given the text of this message, it's very clear that this was an unacceptable type of behavior, and I don't believe it would have been overturned. I think the system worked.
Well, we're going to find out with a lot of federal employees that we believe should be held accountable for bad behavior. And that's one of the huge issues in in this election, and this is going to be a priority for the new administration, and this is a role that this committee is going to play moving forward to try to work with the Trump administration, work with Elon Musk and Mr. M. Swamy to try to make government more efficient. So we'll see. We certainly believe that people, regardless of their party, regardless of their status in their years of service in the federal government, regardless of their ideology, if they've done wrong, then they should be held accountable. And I think the American people agree with us, and I think that was a huge issue in the election a few weeks ago. I want to switch gears and talk about FEMA, and I think a lot of people, myself included, often wonder what is the role of FEMA. So if a hurricane or a tornado or a natural disaster happens, I believe FEMA should be first on the scene. I believe that they, should be in charge of obviously rescue and recovery to ensure that, to help coordinate, to ensure that people have food and shelter. And then, of course, the big role I believe FEMA plays is debris removal to try to help coordinate, to get the power going, to get the roads cleared and things like that. A lot of people wonder, what then? What else is FEMA responsible for? Because I know when we had our issues in West Kentucky, people were thinking that if they didn't have insurance, that FEMA was supposed to come in and pay for that. Can you tell this committee and the American people who are watching this what exactly FEMA's role is the second a natural disaster happens, whether it's a wildfire out west or whether it's a tornado in the Midwest or whether it's a hurricane on the East Coast? What is FEMA's responsibility from start to finish? And how long should that take?
I think the best way to start that, Chairman, is the fact that all disasters are executed at the local level, they are managed at the state level and supported by the federal government, and that's where FEMA comes in. In this particular incident, I contacted governors before the storm made landfall in all of the states that were impacted, encouraging them to ask for a pre-landfall emergency declaration. What that does is it allows me to pre-position resources. And these aren't just FEMA teams, these are the federal government. It gives me the ability to direct other members of the federal government to come in and be able to respond to those immediate life-saving needs as needed after a storm passes. For these events, we pre-position resources from Florida up to North Carolina and into Virginia to support those immediate needs. And we do that at the support of the governor. We have teams that are embedded with the governor sitting side by side who are also communicating with the local emergency managers, the local first responders to know where those needs are so we can direct our resources to the areas that don't have enough. These all start and end with that local first responder, and they did amazing work in those first few hours after these storms passed, and our teams on the ground immediately, the search and rescue teams from across the federal government, were there doing life-saving activities as the storm were passing all of these states. We then support through mission assigning other federal agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers to help assess what the needs are going to be for debris removal, or at the request of a local jurisdiction to actually do the debris removal if they don't have the contracts to do so. And then we continue to support the stabilization of those lifelines, being able to reimburse communities if they put in a temporary bridge or if they've done something to, in the case of Asheville.
And the time's expired, but what's the normal time length for this? What do you have an objective when you go in and say, all right, this is when we hope to be finished? Do we hope everybody's paid? And do you have, is that ever a factor or an objective?
All disasters are definitely unique. My objectives and my timelines are in that response to make sure that I have teams on the ground before landfall, that they are engaged during and after landfall, and then when the governor's team tell us that the incident stabilized, then we demobilize those response teams.
And if I could ask you also, Mr. Chairman, can we release those 9 Border Patrol transcripts from last year of all of these agents who testified?
We'll get back with you. That was yeah.
Terrific.
But no, I said I'm happy to take that issue up with you.
Point of order.
Today's hearing's about the border crisis, a crisis that this administration has created. We've heard the mayor of New York City, we've heard the mayor of Washington, D.C., we've heard Democrat mayors all over the United States talk about this issue. We have highly qualified witnesses here to discuss this serious matter. So I suggest that the questions are addressed to the witnesses today. We have good witnesses, so
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
State your point.
I would just like to inquire from the chairman as to why there would be resistance
That's
to
not a
releasing
point of
the
order.
full
That's not a point of order.
transcripts,
Not a point of order.
Of the
All
Border
right.
Patrol agents that
Not a
you
point of order.
interviewed, and why you don't want the public to see those transcripts.
State your point.
Yeah, are we going to, after you've ruled on something not being a point of order, are we going to allow members to just keep talking
No,
over you?
she's out of order. All right. We're resuming questions. I'll
5 minutes of questions.
thank you. Governor Cuomo, do you stand by the March 25th, 2020 directive?
The March 25th directive was based on the CDC CMS
So
guidance.
you stand by it?
They both do the same thing. Both
You have
CMS,
said that,
CDC, and DOH.
excuse me, you
defend
have
it.
said that the directive followed CDC and CMS guidance. Are you aware of anyone in your office that asked CDC or CMS about the policies in the directive?
The Attorney General opined legally they were the same and said the March 25th order was consistent with the federal guidance.
Okay,
and
so
that's
you
how it
stand
was
by it,
enforced.
and you say it followed federal guidance, then why did it need to be superseded by executive order? Was this because
It was
you were
superseded
getting bad
later
press?
on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
go ahead.
It was superseded later on because we then got to a position in May, I believe, where we had enough testing capacity and we mandated testing for nursing home staff.
So it had nothing to do with public relations or bad
And it
pressure?
also, this political, this was all politics all the time.
Okay.
And it bothered and scared people because they didn't know who to believe.
Okay. So on June 7th, 2020, your executive assistant sent this email writing, and I quote, "This is going to be the great debacle in the history books. The longer it lasts, the harder to correct. We have a better argument than we made. Get a report on the facts because this legacy will overwhelm any positive accomplishment. Also, how many COVID people will return to the nursing homes in that period? How many nursing homes? Don't you see how bad this is? Or do we admit error and give up?" Ms. Benton is your executive assistant. I believe she's sitting behind you. Did she write this email on your behalf?
Yes.
Governor, did you have an email account while you were governor?
No. Well, I may have had one, but I didn't use it.
Okay. Was there a reason?
I haven't used it in years.
Did you communicate in other ways with your staff? Text messages or BlackBerry
Yes.
messages? You did. You just said that you stood by the directive, but this email asked if it was time to admit error and give up. Was the March 25th directive an error?
No, this was the last line, sir, was tongue-in-cheek.
Okay.
This was an ongoing, raging political debate where the Republicans were saying March 25th caused deaths.
So
I said, answer it fully.
I understand, Governor. You testified that you were not aware of the directive until April 20th, 2020, almost a month after it had been issued. When you were asked about it at a press conference after you learned of the order, did you have any concerns about the directive?
When I was asked about it at the press conference, I was not aware of it. If I had been aware of it, my answer would have been very simple. I would have said, ask Donald Trump.
Did you ask questions after you learned about the directive?
After I learned about it,
What
yes, I asked questions.
Give me some examples.
I was debriefed by the Commissioner of Health, who said, this is the theory of CMS and CDC and DOH, that these people are no longer infectious.
Did you ever discuss terminating or amending the directive after you learned of it?
When it was described to me that CDC, CMS, and DOH all thought this was a good idea, and they had a medical theory behind it, that these were non-infectious people, et cetera.
For time's sake, Governor, to return to the email, why did you direct your staff to get a report on the facts?
Well, just to counter the newspaper story.
So on July 6, 2020, the Department of Health issued the report you requested. Was this report peer-reviewed?
I don't know.
It was not. Was this report in a medical journal?
It was not. It was a
It was
government
not.
report. It was not
the-
for a medical journal.
Was the executive chamber involved in the drafting and editing of the report?
I'm sure the executive chamber was.
It was. So you requested a report on the facts, and you got a report that was not peer-reviewed, not in a medical journal, and drafted and edited by the very body accused of wrongdoing. So, Governor, do you stand by the July 6th report?
So this is in real time. We're acting. An agency is taking an action. You ask the agency for a report on the
And
action.
Governor, my time has expired. Mr. Chairman, what's clear is the governor was desperate to change the narrative, to dispel of the notion that his administration failed nursing home residents, that he failed to ask any questions. And Governor, I believe you failed to follow the facts, and it's now clear that you should have done what your assistant suggested in the email, and that was admitted error and given up.
If you believe the CMS and CDC were wrong, then that would be your position.
I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin from Maryland, for 5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman, thank you.
Will come to order. I want to welcome everyone here today, and I know we also want to welcome Speaker Johnson, who is also in attendance today. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. But first, without objection, Representative Mills of Florida and Representative Miller of Ohio are waived onto the committee for the purpose of questioning the witness at today's hearing. Without objection, to order. Good morning. Today's hearing is for the American people who are seeking answers about the attempted assassination of President Trump. A little over a week ago, Americans watched in horror as a shooter attempted to assassinate President Donald J. Trump at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The gunman nearly succeeded. The bullet that struck President Trump's head was less than an inch from taking his life. President Trump survived, but one rallygoer, Corey Comparator, tragically did not. 2 others were seriously injured. It was a horrifying moment in American history. The horror was exceeded only by the bravery of the law enforcement agents who threw themselves in harm's way when shots were fired, the bravery of a crowd unwavering in its refusal to panic, and the bravery of a bloody President Trump refusing to run. While we give overwhelming thanks to the individual Secret Service agents who did their jobs under immense pressure, this tragedy was preventable. The Secret Service's protective mission is to protect U.S. and visiting world leaders and safeguard U.S. elections through protection of candidates and nominees. The Secret Service has a zero-fail mission, but it failed on July 13th and in the days leading up to the rally. The Secret Service has thousands of employees and a significant budget, but it has now become the face of incompetence. The committee has a long track record of providing oversight of the Secret Service. Our predecessors, both Jason Chaffetz and Elijah Cummings, among others, worked together to issue warnings and recommendations to address obvious shortcomings in the agency's makeup and operations. Unfortunately, those warnings and recommendations have gone unheeded. A former president and current candidate for president was shot in the head by a sniper within 500 feet of the podium. This is unacceptable, and we are concerned the Secret Service lacks the proper management to keep protectees safe from bad actors. Americans demand answers, but they have not been getting them from the Secret Service. We are instead learning about new facts about the events surrounding the attempted assassination every day from whistleblowers and leaks. Americans demand accountability, but no one is yet to be fired for this historic failure. Today's witness, Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, is here under subpoena to answer questions about how the agency failed President Trump and the victims who attended the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. It is my firm belief, Director Cheadle, that you should resign. However, in complete defiance, Director Cheadle has maintained she will not tender her resignation. Therefore, she will answer questions today from members of this committee seeking to provide clarity to the American people about how these events were allowed to transpire. We will ask these questions because the Secret Service and its parent agency, the Department of Homeland Security, have been unwilling to provide answers to the American people. DHS has sought to push this hearing to a different time. Secret Service has suggested the hearing occur without media presence, and both agencies have provided only shallow explanations to Congress about what happened on July 13th. Indeed, DHS and Secret Service's lack of communication with the Oversight Committee required me to issue a subpoena compelling Director Cheadle to attend today, and still DHS requested more time to prepare. It shouldn't take this much time or preparation, Director Cheadle, to tell the truth and to be transparent with the American people. I am thankful to the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, for joining me and insisting that Director Cheadle appear today. God knows the ranking member and I disagree on many things, but that does not matter today. The safety of Secret Service protectees is not based on their political affiliation, and the bottom line is that under Director Cheadle's leadership, we question whether anyone is safe. Not President Biden, not the First Lady, not the White House, and certainly not the presidential candidates. The July 13th assassination attempt is one of the darkest days in American political history. It represents the ugliest parts of what American politics has become: hatred of each other and a dangerous turn to extremism. Before we are Republicans or Democrats, we are Americans. If we place our political affiliations above our duty and love of country, we cannot maintain a country. We must ensure our republic is strong, and our republic cannot be strong when our leadership, our elections, our institutions, and our candidates are threatened by extremism and violence. Today, Director Cheadle will answer questions about why she deserves to continue to play a critical role in preserving this country's safety and, at the very least, what led to the catastrophic, deadly events on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. Again, I do not believe Director Cheadle deserves to maintain her position as head of the Secret Service, but members of the American people will make their own decisions based on her answers today. I urge Director Cheadle to be transparent and forthcoming in her testimony today. Americans deserve no less. We have a duty to find out how this happened and to ensure it never happens again. I now yield to Ranking Member Raskin for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Chairman Comer. Elijah Cummings, whose beautiful visage looks down upon.
And I want to welcome everyone here this morning. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. The first order of business is ratifying the new subcommittee roster. The clerks have distributed the roster electronically. I ask unanimous consent that the committee approve the appointments and assignments as shown on the roster. Without objection, the subcommittee roster is approved. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. One of this committee's first hearings at the start of this Congress was examining the worsening border crisis. We heard from two chief Border Patrol agents who testified about a crisis that was setting records for illegal border crossings, migrant deaths, narcotics seized, and suspected terrorists arrested trying to illegally cross the border. Tragically, the Biden administration did not pay heed to their testimony, and the border crisis has continued to deepen, affecting almost every American. Just last week, New York City forced children to stay home from school so that illegal immigrants could be housed in their classrooms. Alongside the Homeland Security Committee, the Oversight Committee has been investigating the border crisis, interviewing chief Border Patrol agents from every sector along the southwest border. We released a staff report yesterday describing their experiences and detailing the hardships of attempting to protect a border without the support of the Biden administration. I urge all my colleagues, including Ranking Member Raskin, to read this very detailed report. Today's hearing is an opportunity to hear from experts with decades of law enforcement experience on how policy decisions made by the Biden administration have led us to the border crisis we are witnessing today. President Biden and his administration have refused to take any responsibility for the catastrophe they created. And now the Biden administration is doing what it does best, asking taxpayers for more money. But more money isn't going to solve much on the border, because what we are seeing isn't a money problem. It's a policy problem. It's a problem of not enforcing U.S. immigration law. No amount of money can fix bad policy. Make no mistake, a blank check in the hands of the Biden administration doesn't mean more border security and less illegal immigration. A blank check doesn't mean more detention and removals of illegal aliens, which is what is needed to stem this crisis. A blank check means more Biden administration policies undermining U.S. immigration law. A blank check means even faster releases of more illegal aliens into the interior of our country. A blank check means more agency memos and rulemaking to undermine the rule of immigration law in this country and give administrative amnesty to whole classes of illegal aliens residing in the country. The Biden administration refuses to acknowledge that 3 years of poor policy decisions have led to the situation we find ourselves in today. And it's not getting any better. Preliminary reports indicate that a record-setting 302,000 encounters were made last month on the southwest border. And the majority of those encountered, at least 2/3, maybe even more, are not being detained for removal proceedings. Under the Biden administration, most illegal aliens are released within hours or days of their apprehension. Those illegal aliens, if they even show up to immigration court at all, will enter a court system now saddled with over 3 million cases nationwide. And even if there are issued a final order of removal, it's unlikely the administration will make them a priority to effectuate the removal. Since the beginning of this Congress, House Republicans have worked to hold the Biden administration accountable for policy decisions that have encouraged illegal immigration and overwhelmed law enforcement. We have also worked to pass legislation to solve this crisis. In May of last year, House Republicans passed H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023, to restore order within our immigration system. Our solutions are simple. Illegal activity on the border must be met with adequate and timely consequences, not a quick release to await years-long removal proceedings where hundreds of thousands of aliens file frivolous or fraudulent applications that create delays for those who truly qualify. Our message to President Biden is this: enforce the law and restore policies that deter illegal immigration. I thank the witnesses for appearing today and look forward to their testimony.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. By the way, how are you doing? Good? Okay. Mr. Bobolinsky. Over here, how you doing? Good. So I just have a question. We've been at this for 15 months now in oversight. I know this is your first time here, but do you think Chairman Comer has proven that Joe Biden has committed a high crime and misdemeanor?
I believe with all the evidence he's gathered, yes, he's proven that Joe Biden has committed high crimes and misdemeanors.
Okay, and so I assume you believe Joe Biden should be impeached.
Well, that's up to you guys.
But do you believe he should be impeached? It's yes or no.
Do I personally believe
you.
Under constitutional...
No. You personally, do you believe he should be impeached?
I do.
Okay, and you believe that because you believe Chairman Comer has proven that he committed a high crime and misdemeanor?
No, because I know that he committed high crimes and misdemeanors.
Okay.
I was involved and saw them happen.
Right, but obviously, with all the evidence, you must believe that all of these hearings for 15 months that the chairman has proven that, right?
You re-ask the question?
Sure. I'll sum it up. I assume you believe he should be impeached, but my point is that the chairman has not yet moved for that. And so, look, Chairman, we got like 3.5 minutes here. I mean, let's just do the impeachment. I mean, why continue to waste millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money if we're going to impeach because you believe you've shown he's committed a high crime and misdemeanor? What are you waiting on? Let's just do it. I mean, by the way, we got Chairman Jordan here also, the double chairman. Why aren't you guys calling for the vote in your committee? When is it going to happen? When can we tell the American people you're going to stop wasting their money and just call for the vote on impeachment?
Gentlemen, yield? Gentlemen, yield?
Sure.
We don't do snap impeachments like you guys. We actually do the facts. We do oversight according to the Constitution.
You're never going to call for it. You're never going to call for it. I mean,
now you can predict. You can predict the future. How do you know?
You guys only have 6 more months probably in power, right, until the election. So are you going to do it in 2 months? Are you going to do it in 3 months? Like, tell the American people.
Does the Constitution put a time limit on oversight? I didn't read that in the Constitution.
If you believe you can't call for the impeachment now, then what you're admitting is you haven't yet proven that he's committed a high crime and misdemeanor. You haven't proven it yet. Otherwise, you would call for it, I assume.
We're doing our work.
Okay, so they haven't proven it, right? They haven't proven he committed a high crime and misdemeanor. Otherwise, we would call for impeachment. So I just, look, you know, the chairman knows me well. I mean, I'm just here to help him, right? And so I just think we should do it today. Let's just call for it. I'll make the motion, Mr. Chairman. I want to help you out. You can second it, right? Like, make the motion to impeach President Biden. Go ahead. It's your turn. You second it. No, nothing. Okay, we got nothing. So I want to, with my last couple minutes, show the American people that they're never going to impeach Joe Biden. It's never going to happen because they don't have the evidence. Okay, this is a show. It's all fake. They just want to do these hearings. It's not leading to impeachment. They're lying to their base on Newsmax and Fox, leading these people to believe that they're going to eventually impeach the president. It's not going to happen at all, ever, period. They don't even have the votes, even if they had it in committee. They don't have the votes on the floor. They know that. They got members resigning rather than taking a vote on the fake faux impeachment. Just ask Ken Buck, who said the speaker ain't going to get me to take an unconstitutional impeachment vote. I mean, boy. I mean, so look, I mean, if these hearings were a success, right, if what we've been doing for the last 15 months had convinced the American people that Joe Biden committed a high crime and misdemeanor, you can be damn sure they would have called the vote by now, right? But they want it to go on. They either want it to go on because they don't have the evidence.
Are you asking me a question?
No, I'm just looking at you.
Oh, okay.
But if you want to talk to me, we can talk.
Well, no, I think you haven't read recent data that shows the American people are well aware of the Biden's corruption.
Perfect. So then ask the chairman why he hasn't called for impeachment, Tony. He's right here. Ask Comer. Hey, Comer, how come you haven't called for impeachment? I'll do it. Watch. Hi, I'm Tony. Hey, chairman, how come you haven't called for impeachment? When are we going to have the hearing? When is the vote going to happen? I mean, you believe it. He believes it. He says it every day on TV. I just don't know when we're going to have the vote. I mean, let's just go. We can save the taxpayers millions of dollars. So, I mean, look, I used all of my time to show that this vote is never going to happen because they have no evidence on Joe Biden. I yield back.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Objection to order. Chair recognizes Mr. Moskowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Man, I love our chairman. I mean, people have called the chairman many things, different adjectives over the last 2 years, but I admire his courage. I mean, literally, as Donald Trump is running away from Project 2025, trying to put as much distance between him and Project 2025 because the American people know it's toxic, but not our chairman. No. Chairman, with all of his wisdom, he features Project 2025 in the hearing, one of our last hearings, right before the election. I mean, if the Trump campaign is listening, here you go, Project 2025 in a hearing. I'm sure they're real happy about that. But, you know, Project 2025 wants to get rid of NOAA, wants to get rid of the National Weather Service, you know, the people that tell you the weather and help us prepare for hurricanes. So I say that as a former director of emergency management for the state of Florida, for a Republican governor, actually, who responded to hurricanes. You know, maybe once we get rid of it, if Project 2025 were to succeed, if Trump were to win, maybe we'll just do it with a magic 8-ball or maybe with a Ouija board. Or maybe we'll do hurricane cones like President Trump did, right? Where he just, circled in another state that wasn't in the cone. So maybe what we'll do is we'll do hurricane predictions, like maybe it'll go to Mississippi, maybe it'll go to North Carolina, or maybe it'll go to all three. Oh, look, I made a smiley face. Maybe that's how we'll do the weather. You know, I could see it right now, right? Trump would come out and say, it's going to be raining cats and dogs today. Please don't eat them. Okay? But, the name of this committee today is Failures and Incompetencies. So let's talk about the big Knish, right? The chairman's failed impeachment. Let's remember, we misplaced an informant over a year ago, couldn't find him, didn't know where he went. Another informant was indicted for providing false information that came from Russian intelligence. We used a second informant who was turned out to be an indicted Chinese foreign agent. And to top it off, the chairman was like, Who could we find to make it even better? Maybe we can get someone to testify from prison, which actually we did here on Zoom. Here is the chairman's 300-page book report on impeachment. He said in his release, "It is the strongest case for impeachment of a sitting president the House of Representatives has ever investigated." Wow, that sounds pretty serious. So I want the chairman to show the American people that we didn't just waste millions of taxpayer dollars to issue this book report. Mr. Chairman, the speaker is watching. You could call for impeachment right now, right? We got a little bit of time left before the election. I mean, you know, just ask the speaker. You could ask the speaker right now, or talk to him. Like, when are we going to schedule impeachment? Or is this just concepts of impeachment? Right? No? Okay. Well, I mean, here's the thing. I think that the chairman titled this, and I love the title of today's hearing, right? A legacy of incompetence, consequences of the Biden-Harris administration policy failures. I made a couple of edits to the title of today. So the title, I think, really is a legacy of incompetence, consequences of the Comer chairmanship, okay? Because all we've had in this committee for 2 years is failure. Failed impeachment, failure on this gas stove nonsense, failure on all the Chinese COVID stuff. They did nothing with that COVID committee. It's all failure. The whole House, the whole 118th Congress is failure. They removed the speaker, right? Then they tried to remove a second speaker, right? That's really great for the American people, right? Then they impeached the cabinet secretary. That hadn't happened in 150 years. They've had multiple CRs fail, right? They can't even keep the government open without both speakers crawling to the Democrats to be the adults in the room to keep government opening. So, I mean, literally, if we're going to talk about failures and incompetencies, we should just look at what we've done here over the last 2 years. And I want to end with this. I mean, literally 2 weeks ago, right, all we heard was about what the Haitian people were doing in Springfield. But no, the chairman wanted to top that. He literally brought a witness who proffered in this committee that the Haitian people would have been better off had they stayed in slavery for several more decades. Mr. Chairman, I want to spare you the embarrassment. You should strike his words from the record. No, you stand by his comment that the Haitian people would have been better off in slavery for 30 more years? Or should we strike that from the record? I just want to spare you that embarrassment. Okay, so the chairman.
All right, your time's expired. Before I recognize Mr. Timmons, I would love to be a fly on the wall when you find out that Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential election and his son pled guilty for corruption.
Why didn't you impeach him? Wait, why didn't you impeach him, Mr. Chairman? Where's the impeachment vote?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Speaker, when's the impeachment vote?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, we have a 300-page book report, tens of millions of dollars.
Chair recognizes Mr. Timmons from South Carolina.
Fake impeachment.
Mr. Chairman, I'll begin by pointing out that Hunter Biden is going to be sentenced on December 16th.
Hunter Biden's not the
and
president.
I bet you money he's gonna...
Timmons, you need to take your medication and leave. Chair recognizes Mr. Timmons.
Mr. Chairman, you're several decades older than me. We know who's taking more medication.
All right. Hunter.
Thank you. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Comer from Kentucky, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Daszak, how long have you been a collaborator with the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I think since about 2003.
So during that time before the pandemic, were you aware of all the types of research occurring at the Wuhan lab?
We were aware of all the published information coming out of the lab and the people we met from the lab.
Were you aware that there was a Chinese military lab associated with Wuhan lab?
No, and I still am not aware of that.
In the fall of 2019, the Wuhan lab virus database was taken offline. Have you ever seen its full virus database?
No.
To your knowledge, did the Wuhan Institute conduct coronavirus research that did not involve EcoHealth?
Yes.
In kind of standard procedure, do researchers publish every virus they find or every experiment they conduct?
And they try and publish most eventually.
So is it possible the Wuhan Institute has viruses or conducted experiments that they never published?
Yes.
So testified to your lack of knowledge regarding activities at the Wuhan lab. Is it possible COVID-19 was the result of a lab leak?
I've publicly stated that many times, including as a member of the WHO mission to investigate the COVID origins. All of us in the group unanimously
so yes,
voted that
it's possible, correct?
that it was possible but extremely unlikely, based on the evidence we have.
Dr. Daszak, the U.S. intelligence community has been investigating the origins of COVID-19. During that investigation, were you ever contacted by any intelligence agencies?
Yes.
Which ones?
The CIA, the FBI, and the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Okay. Dr. Daszak, before I ask you this next question, I want to remind you that you are under oath. Other than the interactions that you just testified to, have you or do you have a standing relationship, either officially or unofficially, with any agency in the intelligence community?
No.
So you've never been an informant for the U.S. government?
You asked me if I have a standing relationship with any agencies in the intelligence community. The answer is no.
So you're stating publicly you've never been an informant for any U.S. intelligence agency?
I'm stating publicly that I do not have a standing relationship with the intelligence community. That was your question.
Have you ever been an informant for any U.S. intelligence agency?
Not to my knowledge. I've certainly, when they've asked me questions, I've provided answers, as any citizen of the U.S.
Like what types of questions? Did they ask you questions before the COVID outbreak?
I've spoken with FBI before the COVID outbreak, of course.
So you had communications with the intelligence community before the outbreak of COVID?
The FBI was a member of the Forum on Microbial Threats, which I'm the chair of, so yes. Only in that context.
Like what types of conversations did you talk about prior to the outbreak of COVID?
Talk about emerging disease threats and what information we have about where on the planet the next virus is likely to emerge.
Did the U.S.
certainly talked about China and the threats of coronaviruses.
So did the U.S. intelligence community know what was going on in the Wuhan lab?
That's a question for the U.S. Intelligence Agency. I mean, we've supplied any information to any government agency.
So the U.S. Intelligence Agency was interested, because you had conversations with them prior to COVID, in what type of activity was taking place in the Wuhan lab.
And I believe they've asked many other scientists too.
How familiar would you state that the intelligence community was with what was going on in the Wuhan lab? Did the intelligence community believe that the Wuhan lab was being used by China to manufacture bioweapons?
Well, that's really for the intelligence community to answer. But in the public statements that they've made, two agencies, I think, have low to moderate confidence that there was some activity, and the other agencies were unable to comment. So I'm not sure they do have much information.
Do you find it troubling that, by all accounts from your testimony, the intelligence community suspected something fishy was going on at the Wuhan lab? Despite that, they still funded research with American taxpayer dollars at the Wuhan lab?
Well, I don't know that the intelligence community funded research there, but
the government did, and the intelligence community is part of the government.
Sure. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. I don't find it troubling at all. I don't think it's unusual, because the only two intelligence agencies, from my recollection, have any belief that that may have been involved in a lab origin of COVID, and they have low to moderate confidence. I just don't think the data are there to support that. And I think that the evidence that this came from a natural spillover is huge and growing every week.
My time's expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
For the Oversight Committee, Mr. Comer is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the Oversight Committee interviews, we've identified a number of White House employees who were involved in the mishandling of classified documents under the leadership of President Biden. Special Counsel Hurd, can you please tell us approximately how many current and former White House employees you interviewed related to your investigation?
Chairman Comer, I don't have that figure immediately at hand. Of course, it was a subset of the 173 interviews that we conducted during our investigation.
Your report indicates that one of those former White House employees who you interviewed was Dana Remus. Is that correct?
We did interview Ms. Remus.
Ms. Remus was President Biden's former White House counsel, correct?
She was President Obama's former White House counsel.
I'm sorry, President Obama's White House counsel. Yes. Related to Ms. Remus, in your report on page 257, you wrote, in May 2022, White House counsel Dana Remus undertook an effort to retrieve Mr. Biden's files from the Penn Biden Center. Remus described the original purpose of that effort as gathering materials to prepare for potential congressional inquiries about the Biden family's activities during the period from 2017 to 2019. Now, it seems odd to me that Dana Remus and Joe Biden's personal lawyers were obtaining documents related to potential congressional inquiries about the Biden family activities when Joe Biden has publicly claimed he had no involvement with his family's business dealings. Can you provide more information about why Dana Remus, a government employee, was retrieving Joe Biden's documents from the Penn Biden Center?
Chairman, I am able to tell you and clarify information that appears in the report about relevant, significant sources of information, but I am not in a position to be able to go beyond that.
When you interviewed President Biden, did you ask him what documents he possessed at Penn Biden Center that could be related to a potential congressional inquiry about his family's activities?
We asked President Biden a wealth of questions about all of the different sets of classified materials that were recovered during the course of our investigation.
Did anything pertain specifically to our congressional inquiry of President Biden that you recall?
If there are more specific aspects of it that you have in mind, Chairman, that would be helpful to me.
Interest pertaining to his family's influence peddling activities?
If it's helpful, Chairman, Appendix A does list in table chart form a brief description of all of the marked classified documents that were recovered in our investigation.
We intend to interview Ms. Remus, and the recording or transcript of your interview would be highly relevant to our future questioning of her. Can you confirm that you did, in fact, record her in your interview?
It was our practice to record the interviews that we conducted, Chairman Comer.
Additionally, in the course of the investigation, the Oversight Committee learned from a Penn Biden Center employee that Annie Tomasini, a White House employee, visited the Penn Biden Center in 2021. Did you interview Annie Tomasini in the course of your investigation?
Chairman, we do not, the report does not reflect that specific name, but what I can tell you is that the report does reflect that we interviewed the Director of Oval Office Operations, and one of the places that's reflected is footnote 973.
Okay. The Oversight Committee interviewed Kathy Chung, a Department of Defense employee and former assistant to Vice President Biden, and learned that Ms. Chung visited the Biden Penn Center in June 2022 after being contacted by White House counsel in May 2022. This was months before classified documents were allegedly found in November 2022. Did you interview Kathy Chung in the course of your investigation?
Chairman, I believe that the substance relating to the subject that you're asking about appears on page 259 of the report. And while the name Kathy Chung does not appear in the text of the report, there are references to interviews of an executive assistant, including at footnote 988.
The Oversight Committee also learned from its interviews with Penn Biden Center employees and Kathy Chung that Dana Remus, Anthony Bernal, and Ashley Williams, all at the time White House employees, then visited the Penn Biden Center on different occasions before the alleged discovery of classified materials in November 2022. Did you interview these individuals during your investigation?
We interviewed many individuals, and I can assure you, Chairman, that it was a priority of ours to interview all the relevant sources of information about these documents, how they got there, who knew about them, and who accessed them.
So again, they were all recorded, is that correct? So there would be recordings?
It was our practice to interview recordings, yes, sir.
How many White House employees visited the Penn Biden Center before classified materials were reportedly discovered there in November 2022?
I don't have
according to the White House.
Sir, I don't have an exact count of.
How many visits to the Penn Biden Center were made by either White House employees or President Biden's personal attorneys before the official discovery of documents in November 2022?
I don't have that figure at hand, but that should be detailed in Chapter 14 of the report, sir.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman.
Are we ready now? All good?
Nope. I don't think she's ready, so. Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, today the House Oversight Committee voted to hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress. Do we need to get everybody? Today, the House Oversight Committee voted to hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress. This is something that, unfortunately, we had to do. We've conducted this investigation for over a year. We've been very transparent with the American people. We've been very transparent with the media. We've published 4 substantive bank memorandums that show concerning transactions from our enemies around the world. We've referenced several hundreds of suspicious activity reports that the banks filed, very concerned about suspicious activity by the Biden family. We've heard testimony from IRS whistleblowers about the IRS and Department of Justice investigating various members of the Biden family for criminal wrongdoing. And can we get you all out, or you just be quiet while we do this interview? Everybody pipe it down. So what we saw today, unfortunately, was a stunt by the president's son to come in. This is the second time when he was supposed to be here in this room. The first time was the day we were supposed to have the deposition. He showed up in front of the Senate and had a press conference, said he was there to answer questions, then got in the car with Eric Swalwell and drove off. Today he came here. He sat on the front row, and the day we voted to hold him in contempt, he didn't bother to show up or tell anyone he was coming or try to work with us on a date for a deposition. We heard Moskowitz say that the president's son was here. He was sitting there to answer questions. When Moskowitz's time expired, I recognized Miss Green. She wanted to ask him questions, and he got up and left. So I don't know what the purpose of the stunt was, but at the end of the day, Hunter Biden doesn't set the rules for Congress. We believe that he's been given special treatment by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, by the IRS, and in each instance, he was, the investigators were told to stand down. We want to bring him in. We have hundreds of substantive questions that we want to ask the president's son about specific transactions, about specific bank violations, and about specific conversations, referencing emails, text messages, and other depositions and interviews. We expect him to come. He was held in contempt today. We passed it out of committee in both Oversight and Judiciary. That will now move to the House floor, I would assume, next week. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes, absolutely. I've been very clear on that. I've said from day one, we want the president's son to come to a public hearing if he chooses, but the deposition isn't debatable. That he's not being treated any differently than anyone else. I know in the previous administration, many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were quick to send subpoenas to members of President Trump's family. And they came. They honored their subpoenas. They spent hours and hours in depositions. This is an investigation that I think has a lot more substance and a lot more credibility than anything they did in the previous administration. We've heard mention of the previous president's transactions with some of his businesses. We've talked about transactions with the Biden businesses, but the problem is we don't know what those businesses are. We sincerely don't, and I don't think anyone in here does. If you do, I'll yield time to anyone in the press. If you can tell me what service was provided, what good was produced to any of these foreign nationals that sent millions and millions of dollars to the Biden family. So we will be more than happy to have a public hearing after the deposition.
Did you know that Hunter Biden was coming today? And since he was here, why not just question him?
We have rules. The rules say you have to notice deposition 3 days. We have rules. And they know the rules. Jamie Raskin used to be a stickler for rules until they applied to Democrats. So we're doing everything by the book. This has been very transparent. We anticipate on publishing a report at the end. I would anticipate there will be criminal referrals in that report. We don't want to do anything that's not by the book, that's not by the rules, that can be kicked out on a technicality. We're doing this the right way. As with any investigation, whether it's a congressional investigation or a legal investigation, you get to the point at the end of the investigation where you bring people in and you talk to them. That's what we want to do with Hunter Biden. We want to talk to Hunter Biden. We want to ask him questions along with Jim Biden, as well as Kevin Morris, who is sitting in here today, who, by our accounts, has loaned Hunter Biden nearly $6 million. And, those can be answered in a deposition.
Will you still be able to write your final report if there is litigation about Hunter Biden coming in to testify? And are you at all concerned about that slowing down the pace of your investigation?
Well, I mean, obviously everything they're doing is to obstruct and to slow down and to do everything they can to delay. But we're going to move forward. We're going to continue to bring people in for depositions. And if they don't come in for depositions, if they don't honor our lawful subpoenas, then we will hold them accountable. That's what just happened in this room. We held them accountable for defying lawful congressional subpoenas.
Do you have assurances from leadership that the contempt votes will go to the full House next week, as you mentioned?
We have assurances it'll go to the House, so I don't know a specific date. I would assume next week.
And have they indicated whether they're going to combine your resolution and the judiciary resolution into one package or vote on them separately?
I would say it would be one package, but I'm not sure. I would assume it would be one package, but I don't know the exact answer for that.
And what do you say to members that are calling this a wild goose chase and a waste of time?
Well, I mean, bank records don't lie. And we've produced lots of bank records. We've produced 4 substantive bank memorandums. When they said that no money has been traced to Joe Biden, that's just simply not true. Even if those were loan repayments, which they weren't, but for any sake, we'll say they were, okay? The money they used to pay the money back came from influence peddling. Those accounts, and Goldman tried to make it complicated because that's what they do in money laundering teams. Those accounts were depleted. There was no money in those accounts. It wasn't hard to trace the money. When you have a checking account that for 90 days has a balance of about $4,000, and then it gets a $200,000 wire, and then that same day they write a check for $200,000, that's a pretty easy thing to trace. And that's what we did to trace the money.
Have you had any communication with Hunter's team between December 13th and now?
Have we had, I don't know.
No, and just to go right
No communication whatsoever.
And you didn't know when he was going to show up?
Had no idea. When we suspected something was up, the Secret Service was in here sniffing around before the start of our committee. So we assumed something was going to happen. And that's a good question to ask the Democrats. Did they know that Hunter Biden was going to pull this stunt today? And that's what this was a stunt, a PR stunt. The last stunt, I would assume he was there to try to receive some type of pity from the American people. But look, the American people have one question. All this complicated investigation, all these transactions, there's one basic question. What did they do to receive the $24 million from our adversaries around the world? Did they stay at a hotel owned by the Bidens? Did they golf at a golf course owned by the Bidens? Did they produce a good or service that was being provided by the Bidens? What exactly did they do? And are you okay with public corruption? Is it okay if the President of the United States sells access to our enemies around the world to his family? Through his family. Is that okay? I don't think it is. I don't think the American people think it is. And the American people want somebody to get answers. The IRS hasn't been able to get answers. We heard that from Ziegler. They haven't been able to get answers. We know the Department of Justice hasn't been able to get answers. We know the FBI hasn't been able to get answers. Quite frankly, many of you in the media haven't done a whole lot to try to get answers. We're doing that. The House Oversight Committee is doing that, and we're doing that in a transparent manner, and we will continue to do that.
In your contempt report, you said, short of the president, Hunter's probably your most important witness. Just going down this path of contempt is a long process. Now the House vote has to get recommended to D.C. Attorney General, Department of Justice has to weigh in. Can you finish your impeachment inquiry and recommend impeachment without interviewing him?
We're going to they impeach. Judiciary impeaches.
Can you finish your investigation without?
We certainly hope so. All we need are people to come in for the depositions, and then we'll be finished. We just need people to show up for the depositions, and we'll wrap this up. Nobody wants to wrap this up more than I do. Last question. Anybody?
Are you at all concerned that the fact that he has offered to testify publicly and that at one point you said you would be open to having him come in hurts your court case?
That what now?
Does this hurt your court case, the fact that he's offered to testify publicly?
No, it's a lawful subpoena, and the Department of Justice is, Steve Bannon offered to do the same thing. There's a similar scenario. Steve Bannon, when he got subpoenaed, wanted to come for a hearing in lieu of a deposition, and they said no. Raskin said no.
Not until the Justice Department's about to prosecute him.
Well, is the Justice Department going to treat Hunter Biden the same way? That's the question you need to be asking Merrick Garland. And look, at the end of the day, after the deposition, we want Hunter Biden to come. He can come, answer all the questions from the committee after the deposition. Because look, the hearing, you all know, and let's not be naive here. Everyone knows that the most substantive forum to get a bunch of questions answered is a deposition. There's no question about that. The hearing, we're going to provide that too, if he wants it. If he doesn't, that's fine. That's what I've said all along. If he wants to have a hearing, that's fine, after the deposition. So thank you all. Sorry it's been a long day. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Schneider, what role does political and financial corruption play in the authoritarian regimes like China and Russia?
It always plays a very fundamental role, as we discussed before, in recruitment, but it also plays an ideological role. Since the basic argument is that democracies are just hypocrisy, everyone is basically corrupt, only money matters. Corruption is used not just as a way to bring in individuals, but it's also used as a way to discredit the entire system.
And internally, those regimes are based on corruption.
And so the point externally is to normalize that. Back in the 20th century, we had rivals that had other visions of the future. Now we don't. Now we have rivals, and this pertains both to China and Russia, whose main message is that our system isn't what it seems to be. There are really no alternatives to just autocratic regimes where only money and power count.
One of our colleagues chided our side of the aisle for raising Donald Trump's name. I think that was presumably directed at Representative Norton, who discussed the millions of dollars that Donald Trump pocketed in unlawful foreign government emoluments from the Chinese government and from the state-owned ICBC Bank while he was president. Is corruption in America irrelevant to our ability to withstand foreign propaganda by authoritarian regimes like China and Russia?
Of course it's not irrelevant, it's very relevant. The way that any kind of political warfare proceeds is by these sorts of connections. A message becomes more plausible because a person is a bit more corrupt. A person is a bit more corrupt, a message becomes a bit more plausible. Anyone who is serious about political warfare would be very attentive to these underlying financial issues, of course.
One of our colleagues mentioned an effort that is underway to stop U.S. government agencies from blowing the whistle on Chinese and Russian propaganda on social media. There are some people who say that it violates the First Amendment if our agencies say there's Chinese propaganda on your website, there's Russian propaganda on your website. What do you think about that? Do you think that in a free society, the government should be able at least to alert the social media or private internet service providers about the existence of foreign government propaganda on their vehicles?
Colleagues in different ways have already raised the point that that TikTok is not the only problem. The problem is the way that social media is designed as such. Democracies tend to work better when institutions are set up in such a way that factuality has an advantage over propaganda. Unfortunately, social media is set up in a different way. It gives an advantage, a financial advantage for advertisers to attention seeking and therefore to shocking propaganda. We know that this can be mediated because when attempts have been made, either by corporations themselves in cooperation or by the government, we have been able to dramatically reduce hostile state-sponsored propaganda. What we face now in 2024 is a major corporation, Twitter, which has chosen not to police itself even as much as the other platforms do. And therefore, we face a situation in which states are taking advantage of this sort of chaos. Hostile actors take advantage of this chaos to change the information environment. This is par excellence an example of psychological warfare, and it would be foolish if the United States government did not allow itself to draw attention to it.
I wonder if you can help us figure out where we've come as a committee, Professor Snyder. About a year ago, our GOP colleagues began heralding an FBI form, FD 1023, that recorded allegations that President Biden acted corruptly in Ukraine and tried to promote these as credible allegations. It turned out that these were lies, and the person who was promoting them has been indicted for lying to the FBI and constructing a false record. It turns out that he was up to his neck in connections to Russian foreign agents, and yet our colleagues at various points called this a smoking gun, said it showed proof that the Bidens took bribes, and so on. Chairman Jason Smith, for example, said this was a smoking gun, and it was the definitive proof that the Bidens took bribes. It's obviously been dropped, and yet this was the genesis of our investigation. How do we understand?
That's just simply not true, but go ahead.
I'll yield to the chairman if you want to take some more time.
No.
Well, you can use your time.
Are you saying the bank statements are Russian disinformation, that the Bidens took $9,000 from
China?
I
agree. You've been talking about bank statements for more than a year, but they don't show anything other than there was no crime.
So it's okay. It's okay for, as Tony Bobolinsky said, for China to bribe Joe Biden's family with $9 million.
But that's the lie that's been discredited. I mean, where is your impeachment investigation? If Joe Biden took a $9 million bribe from China, why aren't you impeaching him for that?
Well, who says we're not?
Well, I can invite Mr. Moskowitz to come back in. Do you want to move for impeachment today? Because I thought that was your main agenda item. You said it was the paramount priority of the committee.
No, this is a hearing on China, and you all have an obsession with Russia and Trump. It's disturbing.
We can talk about China and Trump or Russia and Trump.
You need therapy, Mr. Askin.
No. You need therapy. You're the one who's involved with the deranged politician, not me, okay? I've divorced myself from Donald Trump a long time ago. You're the one who needs to disentangle from that situation. And I will tell you this. If you believe that it would have been illegal for Joe Biden to take $5 million from Ukraine, it certainly would have been. What do you think about Donald Trump taking more than $5 million from the Chinese government while he was president?
Well, we know that Donald Trump had a legitimate business that he talked about and he campaigned on.
The legitimate business was the White House.
What business?
He sold the White House.
Oh, give me a break.
He was
what business was what business were the Bidens in?
Well,
what business did Joe Biden's family own? What business were they in? Did they have hotels? Did they have a social media company? Did they have golf courses? Did they have casinos? Did they have office buildings?
Mr. Chairman.
What business? Did they have an energy
Mr.
company?
Chairman, we have spent tens of millions of dollars pursuing Joe Biden, and you have not identified a single crime.
You are
Really?
lying. That
Really?
is a lie. We have not spent $10 million.
Hey, how much have you spent?
We haven't spent hardly anything.
Oh, it's been for free. Okay. All right. Well, in any event, you know what? Then we get what we paid for it because you got nothing. You got nothing on Joe Biden.
No. Answer
You've
this
not
question.
named a single
Answer this
crime.
question.
No,
what did the Bidens do? What business were they in? Why did they get
can I answer that?
millions and millions of dollars?
Well, no, I would like to ask you a question.
No, you start. What did the Bidens do?
I don't know
what
who you're
business
talking
were they
about.
in?
Well, what business is the Comers in? You're talking about lots of people. There's lots of people in the family.
I'm a farmer.
Your
I have land. I
your
lease land.
impeachment
I sell honey.
investigation must identify
What
a
did the
high crime
Bidens
and
do?
misdemeanor.
What did they do?
I'll
for
tell
the
you what Joe
millions of
Biden did. He was a senator of the United States. Then he wrote a book, and he said he made the most money he ever made in his life, millions of dollars on his book, and he gave $1 million
That's
away
what
to
his
charity.
family did. That's why Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Romania, China, Russia, that's why they paid the Biden family money, because of Joe Biden.
None of those governments paid anyone any money.
Somebody needs therapy here, but it's nobody on our side of the aisle, okay?
All right,
Because
enough.
no,
Back to the
honestly,
China hearing. Back to the China
you
hearing.
had your chance.
Order,
I would
order.
like my time restored.
Well, no, your time was
I would like
expired.
you-
I've
no,
given
you
3
interrupted
extra
me.
minutes.
I want my
No,
time
you had
restored.
your time. You went above, and I'll let Ms. Thornton go a minute.
You know what?
Here, sit down, everybody. Come back. This is about China. We asked a simple question. Now, Ms. Presley, you're out of order. Sit down.
Mr. Chairman,
You're out of order.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
can I make a motion that we take a break for 5 minutes?
We're going to keep going. We'll let the record show that Mr. Raskins could not answer the question.
First of all,
what did the Bidens do to receive the money?
Let me start with this. My last name is Raskin, okay? We've sat next to each other for more than a year. You don't have to add the S. Number 2, I would like my time restored. And number 3,
No, you have
not
your time. You're
identified
out
a
of
single
order.
crime.
No.
Well, what is the crime that you want to impeach Joe Biden for and keep this nonsense going?
Well,
Why? What is the crime? Tell America right now. You
Well,
can have the rest of
you're
my
about
time.
to find out.
What
very
is the
soon.
crime?
You're about to find out
Name
very
it.
soon. Chair
But we
now
inhabit
recognizes
a
Mr.
propaganda
Biggs from
experiment.
Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As Ms. Brown, I want to make this statement that during the recess for votes, my staff made contact with a new whistleblower who provided a credible account that a FEMA contractor visited the home of an elderly disabled veteran's family around October 10th following Hurricane Helene. While there, the FEMA contractor recommended that the family remove Trump campaign materials and signs from both their house and their yard. He warned the family that his FEMA supervisors do not take kindly to Trump supporters and that they seem as domestic terrorists. The elderly homeowners were so frightened by this and afraid that they would not recover their loss that they removed all Trump materials and signs. Nevertheless, FEMA has not returned to their residence. This took place not in Florida, but in Georgia. Administrator, we're happy to provide you with more information on this, but we and the American people want to know what FEMA is doing to ensure that political discrimination is not dictating how the American people are receiving aid following a disaster.
Mr. Chairman, will you share the information with the minority as well so we can follow up on that? Thank you.
Absolutely. Not more than 12 months while our old committee room is under construction. Without objection, the chair may declare recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Welcome to today's hearing on the U.S. Census Bureau with Director Robert Santos. The Census Bureau conducts several surveys and statistical products, but none is more important than the decennial census of the U.S. population. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution requires Congress to ensure a population census is taken every 10 years to serve as the basis for apportioning representation in the U.S. House of Representatives and allocating electoral college votes. It also informs how Congress allocates funds and how federal agencies achieve their missions for the American people. Today we will examine the Census Bureau's ongoing planning and preparation for the 2030 census. While this event is still 5 years away, preparation for the 2030 census has already begun. Counting more than 330 million people is a massive undertaking. It requires engagement with national, state, and local stakeholders to encourage full participation. And it also requires the Census Bureau to leverage lessons learned from the 2020 census. Unfortunately, the 2020 census was flawed in ways not seen in prior censuses. The Census Bureau's post-enumeration survey, which measures census count accuracy, revealed significant errors in 14 states. Significant errors. These errors predominantly benefited Democrat leaning states in the allocation of congressional seats and electoral college votes. In contrast to the 2020 census, no states were found to have had such errors in the 2010 census. But in 2020, the post-enumeration survey suggests there were overcounts in New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Hawaii, Delaware, Minnesota, Utah, and Ohio. And there were undercounts in Texas, Florida, Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Illinois. 6 of the 8 states benefiting from overcounts tended to favor Democrats in awarding congressional apportionment and electoral college votes. Meanwhile, 5 of the 6 states that were unfairly penalized by undercounts tended to vote overwhelmingly Republican. These miscounts had a huge impact on representation. Small numbers of proportional differences in population between states can impact the apportionment calculation. In the 2020 apportionment, a difference of only 89 people was the tipping point for New York being apportioned 26 seats instead of 29. Just 89 people in the state of New York. Based on the 2020 post-enumeration survey, it is likely that miscounts caused Colorado to gain a seat it would have not gained otherwise, and for Rhode Island and Minnesota, to each keep a seat they would have lost. Meanwhile, Texas and Florida likely should have gained a seat. If anybody's been to Texas and Florida lately and been to Rhode Island and Minnesota lately, I would beg to differ that there's a significant difference in the growth and population increases in those states. It's imperative that we understand what went wrong in the 2020 census and take action to mitigate the risk of those similar errors in the 2030 census. Mitigating these risks is even more important because there are major demographic changes happening across the country as citizens of blue states flee from those high-tax sanctuary jurisdictions for red states to enjoy lower taxes, a safer environment, and to exercise more freedom. Finally, the Equal Representation Act, passed out of this committee and by the House earlier this year, is critical to ensuring fairness in our electoral process. This legislation adds a straightforward citizenship question to the decennial census questionnaire to ensure accurate information. It also ensures that only U.S. citizens are counted for apportionment of congressional seats and electoral college votes. American citizens' federal representation should be determined by American citizens only. We must get this bill passed by Congress and signed into law. I look forward to hearing from Director Santos today about the Census Bureau's efforts to prepare for the 2030 census and ensure its success and accuracy. I now yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
For 5 minutes. Mr. Edlow, can you provide specific examples of Biden administration policies that have contributed to the historically high level of illegal immigration we're currently witnessing?
Certainly. And let me start by saying, Mr. Chairman, I actually agree with the previous point that we want to have policies that encourage legal immigration and disincentivize and deter illegal immigration. The problem that we're seeing right now are that the policies that have been put in place by this administration, specifically the regulatory actions aimed at credible fear determinations and at how the immigration courts are supposed to function, do exactly the opposite. The circumventing lawful pathways regulation, which creates a presumption that someone is or is not eligible for asylum if they've come over unlawfully, there are so many loopholes in that one that if you bring a child, you're going to be able to go claim asylum, whereas you wouldn't if you didn't have a child. So it's going to encourage more illegal immigration, more families coming across. Certainly the memorandum from Secretary Mayorkas that limits the amount of, or that limits the categories rather of people who can be removed. Again, those are so narrowly defined that it's going to create an incentive, not a disincentive for people to come over.
So does the high flow of illegal immigration divert resources used to adjudicate other immigration benefits? And if so, is there an impact on individuals seeking other immigration benefits?
Absolutely. You know, looking at USCIS, the backlog of affirmative asylum cases for people that are in this country that are trying to get asylum, the backlog of affirmative cases for people seeking all sorts of immigration benefits. And Mr. Chairman, right now, I actually represent a couple private immigration clients, and I can tell you the lines are very, very long because so much of the resources have been put to address or to funnel in people from the southwest border instead of focusing on large other swaths of legal immigrants that are trying to come do this the way that we've always said under the law. The bottom line is the law is not being followed. If the law was being followed, we wouldn't be here.
So what policies would the administration need to implement to start to get the situation under control?
The first policy is simply follow the law. Start with expedited removal. Make sure that people who are going through are getting their credible fear, but that they are detained during that process as Congress has prescribed. Move forward with that. Get them into immigration court as quickly as possible. The previous administration, we did that. We had people in immigration court quickly.
Okay, Mr. Hammond, we've traveled to the border, this committee, the majority members of this committee several times, and we've heard from many complaints from our Border Patrol agents. Can you describe how the Biden administration has hampered the ability of ICE officers and ICE prosecutors to enforce immigration laws?
Yes, I will, but I want to address just a couple of things that were said previously. Mr. Raskin, I never said a majority of the aliens didn't show up in court. I said a majority won't leave them, their order removed. So that was not right. And just heard the expert witness for the Democrats say that's why they're coming. A job. That's why they're coming. So again, it's showing abuse of the asylum process. But that's not what asylum is about. So thank you for that, sir. And finally, a comment was made about separating mothers with children. Let's not forget, 440,000 children enter this country through the use of criminal cartels in the hands of criminal organizations that self-separated from their families because of policies of this administration. We've also, this administration's lost track between 85,000 and 100,000 children that were released to so-called sponsors that we can't find. They have no idea who they are, if they're in danger, who's taking care of them, and what they're doing. But we do know this. There's been many investigations where children were found in meatpacking plants, cleaning up entrails on a midnight shift, forced labor. So I want to mention that. And the biggest thing about the border, when you cause a crisis this big, when you make promises, you can enter the country legally, you'll be released quickly, because this administration's not enforcing the law. The only thing they've done is send more resources to the border to process quicker and release quicker, because they care about the optics. When you do that, more are going to come. So when they overwhelm the Border Patrol, I can tell you right now, in the last several months, there's been times where there are certain sectors on the southwest border where 100% of Border Patrol agents were pulled off patrol to come in and process. When you do that, the criminal cartels have a field day. They know if there's, on average, less than half the Border Patrol's on patrol, sometimes 70, 90%. So what they do, they'll send a big group of people through one area, 200 family groups, knowing that whatever's left on the border is going to seize to that opportunity for the humanitarian crisis, because a lot of these people are in bad shape. Meanwhile, there's hundreds of miles of border empty. So what they have done is overwhelm the patrol. So I've had Border Patrol agents tell me they've used the term broken arrow. When they're off the line, they're frustrated because they don't know what's coming through the parts of the border where there's no agents, because they're all busy making meals, making hospital transports, making baby formula, taking care of these humanitarian issues. That's the issue. They've created the biggest national security crisis I've seen since 9/11, because we got 1.9 million gotaways. So I don't care what, everybody can talk about the data all you want. 1.9 million known people have entered this country. We don't know who they are, where they're from, or why they came here. But I'll tell you this, they've arrested people from 181 different countries. Some of these countries sponsor terror. They've arrested over 300. If you don't think a single one of that 1.9 million didn't come here to do us harm, then you're ignorant to the data.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Contributed to that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Comer from Kentucky, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On May 16th, we heard from your boss, Dr. Lawrence Tabak, regarding some of your emails and avoiding the Freedom of Information Act. And I'm sure, as you've already testified, you're aware that deleting federal records is a crime. And as you've said, you previously testified that you did not delete any federal records. But on February 24th, 2021, you wrote, quote, "I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I'm FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail, end quote. And the next day on February 25th, 2021, you wrote, quote, but I learned the tricks last year from an old friend, Marge Moore, who heads our FOIA office and also hates FOIAs, end quote. Yes or no, is Marge Moore the FOIA lady you were referring to?
She was at the time. I believe she's retired since then.
Did the NIH FOIA office instruct you on how to delete emails or avoid FOIA?
No.
On October 25th, 2021, another scientist wrote, quote, David is concerned about the privacy of text and other messages from his cell phone to you and me because he has been using a government phone. This came from Tony, end quote. Sir, did you ever have any conversations with Dr. Fauci regarding using personal phone or email to communicate with Dr. Daszak?
I don't remember it. It's possible. I probably wouldn't have remembered it, and I don't remember it. He and I usually never talked about that kind of stuff. It would be very unusual if it happened.
On January 18th, you testified that you did not have any conversations with Dr. Fauci regarding EcoHealth. On October 25th, 2021, you wrote, quote, Peter, from Tony's numerous recent comments to me, they're trying to protect you, end quote. You meaning EcoHealth and Dr. Daszak. Dr. Renz, did you ever have any conversations with Dr. Fauci regarding EcoHealth?
Well, the ones you just mentioned, I don't have any recollection of that.
No recollection?
No recollection, no. But let me just say, what I do remember is one time in a face-to-face meeting, he referred or alluded to some stuff that was in the press. I don't even think he said what it was, but it was about, I assumed it was about Peter's grants and press reports about it, and the ending of the grant. And I said to him, sort of out of the blue, guessing what he was really thinking, I said to him, Tony, I know you would have never been involved in getting rid of that grant. And he didn't respond. He just sort of looked at me and...
So Dr. Fauci was always a big defender of EcoHealth and their right to receive federal funding?
I can't speak for him. I think he had great respect for them. And when the grant problems came about, I think he was troubled by it. In fact, I just thought of something that I'd forgotten to say. At some point, somebody, it may not have been Tony, but it might have been Hugh Uppencloss, somebody said to me, you know, Peter's his own worst enemy because he made some mistakes on that grant.
I would say that's a factual statement. On April 21st, 2021, you wrote that Dr. Fauci is, quote, too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble, end quote. On June 16th, 2020, you wrote, we're all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns, and if we wouldn't put them in emails, and if we found them, we'd delete them. Now, did you ever have conversations with Dr. Fauci regarding deleting emails?
I don't remember any such thing.
You don't remember?
No, sir. And it would be very, Tony and I don't have those kind of conversations.
Did you ever delete any official records?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, but again, we're at the issue of defining what's a federal record. I deleted a lot of emails. I do it every day. But in my mind, they're trivial things not related to government business.
In response to my questions, Dr. Back said he absolutely agreed with every compliance action the NIH took against Dr. Daszak and EcoHealth. And over the past 2 weeks, both EcoHealth and Dr. Daszak have been suspended from receiving federal funding, finally, and proposed for debarment. Do you agree with NIH's actions against EcoHealth?
You know, I don't know the details about, I've never seen the grant. I don't know what's in it. I can't really speak to that, but I can say I've known Peter Daszak for almost 20 years, and in my personal opinion, he's an honorable, decent.
So have you had conversations with Dr. Daszak about this recent suspension?
Not a conversation. I knew about it. He sent me an email or something. Was a press
So they
release.
occurred over email? You and Dr. Daszak communicated via email about his disbarment?
I should say Gmail, not NIH email. He doesn't send, you know, he was sending NIH stuff to my NIH email for a long time, and I kept telling him don't do that. And that's how this Gmail thing started. He sent me, in 2020, he sent a message to me on my government NIH email, and I forget what it was. Maybe I never knew what it was, but eventually that email was FOIA'd.
Okay.
So wait a second, can I finish?
Go ahead.
Eventually, this email was FOIA'd, and Peter contacted me and said, you know, some friend you are, I send you an email with all my personal stuff, and it ends up in the newspaper. And that really struck me. That was a turning point for me, because he was under death threats. And
Right, and I get it. Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one last yes or no question. Have you had any conversations with Dr. Dasick about this suspension, yes or no?
The suspension?
The suspension of the disbarment, the suspension.
Not conversation, but he has sent me an email with.
But that's email's a conversation via email then. You've had a conversation via email with Dr. Dasick.
Well, if you call it a conversation, yes. It's, you know, we didn't talk about it, but he just sent it to me and I read it or not. That's all.
Thank you. Yield back.
Now recognize Ms. Ross from North Carolina for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognizes the chairman of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Comer, for an opening statement.
Thank you. In August 2022, President Biden questioned in a 60 Minutes interview how anyone can be that irresponsible when asked about classified documents in the possession of former President Trump. But when President Biden said this, he knew that he had stashed classified materials in several unsecure locations for years, dating back to his time as vice president and even as a U.S. senator. President Biden, the White House, and his personal attorneys have not been honest with the American people about his willful retention of classified material and continue to hide information from Congress. President Biden's attorneys claim to have first discovered classified material at Penn Biden Center on November 2nd, 2022. However, President Biden and his lawyers kept it secret from the American people before the midterm elections. CBS News broke the story in January 2023, leaving Americans to wonder if the White House had any intention of ever disclosing that President Biden hoarded classified documents for years. One of my first actions after becoming chairman of the House Oversight Committee was to launch an investigation into President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. This investigation started before Special Counsel Hur was named, and what we found is alarming. Information obtained through multiple transcribed interviews conducted by the Oversight Committee contradict the White House's and President Biden's personal attorney's narrative about the discovery of classified documents at the Penn Biden Center. In fact, the real timeline began in the spring of 2021, not November 2022, as the White House claimed. Additionally, the classified documents were not kept in a locked closet, as asserted by the White House. We've also learned that 5 White House employees and a Department of Defense employee were involved in the early stages of coordinating the organizing, moving, and removing of boxes that were later found to contain classified materials. There's no reasonable explanation as to why so many White House employees were concerned with retrieving boxes they believed only contained personal documents and materials. Why did President Biden keep these specific documents in unsecure locations for years? Many questions remain, but now the White House is obstructing Congress as we seek the truth for the American people. We've subpoenaed former White House counsel Dana Remus to appear for a deposition to provide information to our committee, but the White House is seeking to block her testimony. We've also subpoenaed the Department of Justice for audio recordings and transcript of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Hur. These were due the morning of the State of the Union. Only this morning, a couple of hours before today's hearing, the Department of Justice finally provided the transcript of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Hur. The timing is not coincidental. Although we've had little time to review the transcripts, from what we have seen, it is clear that the White House did not want Special Counsel Hur's final report to be released. The White House has refused to be transparent with the American people about the president's mishandling of classified documents. And worse, they have appeared to have lied about the timeline, about who handled the documents, and even about the contents of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Hur. That is why today's hearing is important. Transparency is what we seek today, and we look forward to Special Counsel Hur's testimony. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Oversight Committee.
I yield.
Gentlelady yields. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Director, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have consistently said that the Census Bureau should not be partisan. It should be nonpartisan. I agree completely. They say it should not be political. I agree with that. The problem is the mistakes that were made in the last census have huge political consequences. By looking at the undercount in the red states and the overcount in the blue states, it's very safe to say that between 3 and 4 congressional seats were distorted because of the mistake of the census. 100% confident those 3 or 4 seats would have been Republican based on the voting patterns in the last election in those states and the margins of victory for Trump and defeat for Harris. When you're talking about 3 or 4 seats in Congress, that's the margin of this Congress. That's everything. That depends on who's chairman of the committee and the policy and the direction. It's of the utmost significance to the whole political system in America. And I know you weren't director during the last census. The last director was Stephen Dillingham, and I was on this committee. This committee, by the way, has legislative jurisdiction over the census. And I was, I publicly made statements of my concern about how the census was being conducted because we did have the COVID pandemic. And I guess my question is, I'm still trying to understand. During a normal year of census, you have all these census workers. I have friends that used to work part-time for the census. If someone didn't fill out their application, then let's say in 2010 or in the previous 100 years, someone from the census would knock on their door and help them fill out their form. How was that conducted during COVID? I mean, I would assume that there were a significant number of doors that were never knocked on because of COVID. Then there were estimates that were made, right? Can you kind of briefly explain how that worked? I mean, what do you have any idea? What percentage of homes were never contacted? What percentage of the homes that did not fill out the census forms or the online form or whatever were never contacted?
To my knowledge, if a home was sent a mailable address,
right,
and
that's always the way it's been done, and there are always a significant number that don't fill them out, and then someone from the census would knock on their door, but they didn't the last time because of COVID restrictions. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
You're saying every house in America got knocked on?
That is not correct. I'm saying that we had a protocol that sent out a mailing, multiple mailings. People either self-respond, or they didn't. If they didn't, that kicked in the next phase called the non-response follow-up. And it's that subset of houses that gets knocked on.
And every person that did not respond was greeted by a census employee.
Every household.
Every
It's an
household.
address.
How
That's
then,
to my knowledge.
How then was there such a mistake in the census? Many of us believe that the federal agencies are populated with hyper-partisan, left-wing extremists. And, it just so many mistakes that are made, big mistakes in this town, always just mysteriously benefit Democrats at the expense of Republicans. So the purpose of this hearing is we're going to be watching the census, and we expect it to be pretty accurate. You mentioned technology, use technology in helping to count. How many employees full-time right now are in the census?
Full-time, I would think, I'm guessing around 10,000. Because
10,000.
Not only do we...
I know that doesn't count how many you hire part-time during the census year, but 10,000.
We have 6 regional offices.
You mentioned the adoption of technology and AI and all of that. Do you still need 10,000 employees? Or because of technology, can the census get by with less employees?
Well, keep in mind, Congressman, that we have 3 different censuses. 2 of the 3 we do every 5 years, economic census and
Are
the census
they
government.
any more accurate than the last one? And let me say this. According to recent projections, the states that voted for their electors for Kamala Harris are poised to lose as many as 12 seats. If the projections continue, the way the blue state, you would assume more people are probably going to move out of New York, and more people are going to move to South Carolina and Florida and some of the growth states. More people are moving to Arizona, Montana, the Dakotas, out of California. So it's of the utmost importance that we have confidence in the census. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't have confidence in the census the last time, and that wasn't under you, and that was in the Trump administration. We're trying to determine now whether we're going to have confidence in the census moving forward. And I just think it's very important that every one of those 10,000 employees in the census understand that we're watching the census, and we expect with the technology, with the massive budget you have, with all these federal employees, we expect a better product than what we got in this last census, because this last census was not acceptable. It was political, and we're very disappointed in the Census Bureau. So with that, Chair now recognizes Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would warn you not to sleep on news.
And I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Comer from Kentucky, for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Tabak, I want to thank you for being here today representing NIH. I want to ask both about the situation regarding EcoHealth and a few questions regarding the Institute's record retention policies. Starting with EcoHealth. Yesterday, HHS proposed debarring them from federal funds, from receiving federal funds. Does NIH agree with this decision?
Yes, we do.
Back in 2020, when NIH originally terminated and then suspended the EcoHealth grant, many scientists were outraged. We have emails where Dr. Daszak called NIH actions Stalinesque. He called you, NIH acting dentist director, Tabak, and your oversight actions as an anti-science shit show. And that's a quote, not my word. Dr. Tabak, do you agree with the request NIH made of EcoHealth?
Oh, absolutely.
Dr. Tabak, do you agree with the actions NIH has taken against EcoHealth?
Completely.
Is anyone entitled to receive federal funds?
Of course not. You have to demonstrate your ability to oversee them correctly.
And did EcoHealth fail to satisfactorily answer NIH's request?
They have.
All right. So NIH reinstated EcoHealth's grant on the condition that there would be no work in China and the Wuhan lab had already been debarred. Dr. Daszak testified that since then, and during the course of the grant, he spoke routinely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology to get data and publish papers. Did Dr. Daszak ever inform the NIH that he would keep working with the Wuhan lab even though they were debarred?
Not to my knowledge.
Shifting to some questions regarding NIH's document retention policies. Dr. David Moran, a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci for decades, wrote in an email to Dr. Daszak, quote, "I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail," end quote. Is that consistent with NIH document retention policies?
It is not.
Does the NIH FOIA office teach employees how to avoid transparency?
I certainly hope not.
He also later wrote Dr. Daszak, and I quote, "We are all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns, and if we did, we wouldn't put them in emails. And if we found them, we would delete them," end quote. Is that consistent with NIH document retention policies?
It is not.
Finally, emails show that Dr. Morans would share internal discussions regarding upcoming FOIA releases with Dr. Daszak. He would then help Dr. Dassett craft responses to documents being released in these FOIAs. Are those actions consistent with NIH policies?
If those actions occurred, they would not be consistent. No.
So do these actions concern you, Dr. Tabak?
It does indeed.
What is Dr. Moran's current employment status?
He is an employee of NIH.
Well, I think you see where my lines of questioning were leading. We have some serious concerns. We have fought in the select subcommittee, the oversight committee, on obtaining information. And, you know, here you have admission of deleting information, going to great lengths to not be transparent in an apparent cover-up of something that I think we would agree in a bipartisan manner is one of the most serious issues that our country's ever faced, the COVID-19 pandemic. So I appreciate the work of Chairman Winstrup and the full committee here to try to get to the truth, give the American people the truth, because that's what they want. And that's what this committee's role is. But we also want to hold people accountable for wrongdoing. So we look forward to working with you to help us achieve what the American people want us to achieve in this select committee. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back. Mr. Dreher, your testimony states that your firm, which is employee-owned, and I might add that's my favorite kind of ownership of any private business, just wants a fair opportunity to compete and win federal awards. But you say the administration's PLA mandate denies you and your employees that fair opportunity, and you're right. Even the Boston Globe editorial board last month wrote that, quote, although they don't say so explicitly, PLAs in effect limit public work only to firms whose workers belong to a trade union, end quote. If your firm wants to continue to perform federal awards, you need to convince a union to which your employees do not belong to agree with you to work with you. Your testimony says this gives the union maximum leverage to dictate the terms to you. Is it accurate to say the PLA rule makes your firm hostage to outside labor unions since you can't perform federal projects unless you agree to cater to their terms?
Absolutely.
So what sort of provisions harmful to non-union contractors and their workforce might a PLA include?
So just taking a step back, looking at the whole picture here, right? I think we can all agree that the industry's short over 500,000 workers right now. And from 2009 to 2023, 12 out of 3,210 contracts had a PLA. We're not against PLAs. We don't want PLAs mandated. This industry needs fair and open competition. We have a lot of work to do, rebuilding our bridges, our highways, our naval infrastructure, and adding another roadblock in like this, mandating these requirements, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't help this country achieve its mission to improve our infrastructure.
I agree completely. Mr. Brubeck, federal contracting professionals seem to think the project labor agreement mandates unwise since they choose to use them only 12 out of more than 3,000 construction solicitations since 2009, even when encouraged to use them by President Obama. So do you think these contracting officers will try to obtain case-by-case waivers from the PLA rule?
Yes, they're going to try to do that, but the waiver process that's been constructed by the rule is actually a bad faith waiver process. I was talking to an Army Corps of Engineers executive procurement officer. They have to get a waiver by going all the way up to the senior procurement officer of the Army Corps of Engineers. This is a gentleman who oversees all procurement of missiles, weapons, tanks, all that stuff. It's not even the head of the construction side of the Army Corps of Engineers. By the time that goes all the way up the chain of command and back down, that project solicitation is going to be delayed immensely. It's designed to make sure there are no exceptions. We have not heard of any exceptions to this policy, despite the contracting officers asking for those or asking us to see if our litigation would be able to provide exception to this.
Mr. Dreher testified that his firm, which has won many federal construction awards, won't be able to bid on many projects due to the PLA mandate. If an agency can show a solicitation, we'll get a lot fewer bids due to a PLA mandate. Does that qualify them for a waiver?
Apparently, the OMB memo says that if they get 3 or fewer bids, then they could qualify for a PLA exemption, but they have to go up to the senior contracting officer, procurement officer, and ask for that. And then they have to justify that in a written report. The senior procurement officer's decision is going to be published on a public website for further scrutiny and perhaps intimidation.
Have any waivers been issued since January?
I'm not aware of it. I'm aware of about 50 solicitations in the pre-solicitation or solicitation phase that have PLA language. I'm not aware of one waiver being offered so far.
Okay, that's what we thought. Mr. Luday, your testimony states that the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority received only a single bid on the first federal contract issued under the PLA rule. How many bids do you typically receive on projects?
Yes, that's correct. We received a single bid on the West Shore project that had the PLA. We typically receive anywhere from 4 to 5 to even 10 bids on large infrastructure
That
projects.
doesn't sound like a very good deal for the taxpayers.
That's right.
Will you have to rebid the project?
At this time, we do not believe that the Corps will rebid the project, no.
So is this going to, so will this, the fact that you just got one bid, will that delay the timeline or any?
Right now, we're working through that process with the Corps, so there's uncertainty as to how it will move forward. They're trying to award that project, but as soon as we get more information.
Well, the Corps worked so quickly, I didn't know if.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I really, Madam Chair, appreciate you holding this hearing. This is a serious issue, and hopefully we can figure a better way out. So with that, my time's expired.
Did you know that Hunter Biden was coming today? And since he was here, why not just question him?
We have rules. The rules say you have to notice deposition 3 days. We have rules. And they know the rules. Jamie Raskin used to be a stickler for rules until they applied to Democrats. So we're doing everything by the book. This has been very transparent. We anticipate on publishing a report at the end. I would anticipate there will be criminal referrals in that report. We don't want to do anything that's not by the book, that's not by the rules, that can be kicked out on a technicality. We're doing this the right way. As with any investigation, whether it's a congressional investigation or a legal investigation, you get to the point at the end of the investigation where you bring people in and you talk to them. That's what we want to do with Hunter Biden. We want to talk to Hunter Biden. We want to ask him questions, along with Jim Biden, as well as Kevin Morris, who is sitting in here today, who, by our accounts, has loaned Hunter Biden nearly $6 million. And you know, those can be answered in a deposition.
Will you still be able to?
Thank you, Mr. Galanis, and I want to thank all the witnesses again for being here today. We will now begin the questions, and I want to remind members on both sides of the aisle, each member has 5 minutes. I'm going to adhere to that and hit the gavel. If the question has been asked, then we'll allow the witnesses time to respond. But we are going to try to get in a lot of questions from a lot of members, and I will begin the questioning, followed by Ranking Member Raskins. Again, Mr. Bobulinski, thank you for your service to our country, your military service. Appreciate you being here. During the 118th Congress, this committee has investigated Joe Biden's involvement in his family's influence peddling schemes around the world. So let's start with that. Mr. Bobulinski, was Joe Biden involved with any of your business dealings with Hunter Biden and James Biden? Was Joe Biden involved in his family's attempts to sell their access to him? You set out a form. To form a legitimate business. You set out to form a legitimate business with the Bidens. Did you come to find out that the Biden family had no interest in doing real business?
I did.
Mr. Galanis, are you aware of any times Hunter Biden used Joe Biden with Joe Biden's knowledge to benefit their business associates?
Yes.
Which business associates?
Elena Baturina, Russian oligarch,
Russian.
testified about. Russian, Chinese, Chinese fund manager, Henry Zhao, and Nikolai Zlochevsky, a Ukrainian oligarch, oil and gas oligarch.
Okay. Now that we've established that Joe Biden was involved in his family's business dealings, I'd like to turn to the financial records we've subpoenaed. One major point my Democrat colleagues downplay is how much money the Bidens accumulated from foreign business ventures in such a short period of time. We have over $24 million to the Biden family and their business associates from 2014, while Joe Biden was vice president, to 2019. Mr. Bobulinski, there came a time when you were attempting to raise $10 million from the Chinese to pursue an actual business deal, a real business deal. But it wouldn't be correct to say this was a $10 million deal, would it? What did the Bidens conceive of the business with the Chinese becoming?
The Chinese were committing to deploying billions of dollars in infrastructure projects here in the United States as well as around the world.
Mr. Galanis, what was the financial goal you, Mr. Archer, and Hunter Biden set out to achieve? Was it millions of dollars or billions of dollars?
Billions of dollars.
Billions with a B.
Yes, billions.
Now I'd like to turn to some of the statements Joe Biden has made during his presidency about the findings of this investigation. Mr. Bobulinski, Joe Biden has said he never interacted with his family's business associates. Did he meet with you?
He did.
In fact, are you aware that Joe Biden also met with...
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, he did
yes, go ahead.
multiple times.
Several, okay. Are you aware that Joe Biden also met with Rob Walker, Eric Sherwin, and Devin Archer, too?
I'm generally aware of it.
Mr. Galanis, as you discussed earlier regarding Yelena Baturina, the Russian oligarch, you were present for Hunter Biden calling his then Vice President father with the Russian oligarch, Yelena Baturina. Present, correct?
That's correct.
You also were present for Hunter Biden's conversation with his father about a board seat on a Chinese company board. Is that correct?
I was present for a call when Chinese transactions discussed, yes.
So, Mr. Galanis, isn't it true that when Joe Biden said he didn't interact with his family's business associates, that's not true, is it?
I believe it would be misleading to the point of being an untruth.
I want to touch on the fact about the absent seat in the middle. Hunter Biden has chosen not to attend today's proceedings. I've given Mr. Biden exactly what he asked for before his deposition. It's clear that Hunter Biden knows his testimony would not withstand public scrutiny. Joe Biden has not been truthful about his participation in schemes to sell access and influence. And today's witnesses will show the American people a side of the story that the president and his allies on this side of the aisle are eager to hide. Mr. Bobulinski, can you tell us about your meeting at the Beverly Hilton with Joe Biden?
The short version or a long version?
Long version, but within a minute.
Okay. So Hunter Biden, Jim Biden, and Joe Biden were in Los Angeles for a variety of business discussions. Joe was there to speak at the Milken Conference in May of 2017. I had lunch with Hunter Biden at the Chateau Marmont, and he had asked me to meet with his father that night. He set up a meeting at the Beverly Hilton where they hold the Milken Conference, and I got there a bit early and sat with Jim Biden, Hunter Biden, and we're just talking about what we were doing with the Chinese and the legal documents I was working through. And they had sort of coached me before Joe showed up to, listen, we're going to just keep things at a very high level. We're not going to go into a lot of details in this meeting. And I just remember that discussion generally because it just struck me as odd, honestly. Joe wasn't in the White House then, and that they were sort of framing it that way. And then Joe showed up, walked through the lobby of the Beverly Hilton Hotel. I stood up to shake his hand, and we sat down and spent 45 minutes to an hour going through my background.
You met with him that long?
Yes. This wasn't a handshake, a 2-second discussion about the weather. This was a 45-minute long meeting to an hour where we talked about a lot of stuff.
Very good. Thank you. Chair now recognizes ranking member asking for his questions.
But we're actually going to go to Mr. Garcia to begin.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you.
I just want to make 3 points in closing. The first is that Americans want the EPA to be doing more to stop climate change, not less. And yet we heard from a number of our colleagues on the GOP side today, as well as from Project 2025, that EPA's rules are hurting Americans. But that's not the perspective most Americans have. Most Americans want the EPA to be doing more. We have a philosophical difference or a scientific difference. We believe that climate change is real and is a dagger pointed at the throat of humanity. And too many of our colleagues agree with the erudite gentlelady from Georgia who calls climate scientists and most Americans, by extension, climate cultists. We heard it twice from her today. Well, if there are brainwashed cultists on the issue, it is the people who are following the conspiracy theories of QAnon and assert that scientists like Dr. Fauci are trying to invent diseases. That's where the cultists come in. Secondly, a number of our colleagues wanted to lecture you, Administrator Regan, about the role of agencies, which are, of course, indispensable in implementing the will of Congress. That's why Congress set up the EPA. That's why Congress set up the National Labor Relations Board. That's why Congress set up the Department of Justice. And our colleagues have no problem using those agencies to get the things done they want to do. If you read their Project 2025, they want the President of the United States to be able to use the Department of Justice for the first time in American history to go after his political opponents. And to oh, well, if you disagree with that, then I'm delighted to hear it, Mr. Chairman.
Which Department of Justice going after political opponents? The Merrick Garland Department of Justice or the
Well, let's
next
see.
department?
There's a case right now against the Democratic senator from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez. There's a case right now against a Democratic congressman from Texas.
I see a pattern with Democrats.
And well, wait a second. No, don't be too clever. You're a smart man, but try to follow a principled argument. You just claimed that the Department of Justice was somehow biased against Republicans. And I'm naming you cases where the DOJ is going after Democrats. Your problem is the jury system in New York, which found unanimously that Donald Trump was guilty of 34 criminal felonies. That's got nothing to do with the Department of Justice.
Well, when the Department of Justice sends the number 3 guy down there to prosecute the case on behalf of the...
Which case are you referring to?
The Trump case that you just referred to.
You're talking about the District Attorney Bragg's case in New York?
The number 3 guy went down to
New
York.
All right, well, we'll have to take that up at another point, but I'm talking to you about what former President Trump says he wants to do. And if you think it's outrageous, then I am delighted to hear it, that he would use the Department of Justice.
No, I just thought it was outrageous you saying the Department of Justice under Trump was going to be weaponized when we believe that this Department of Justice has been pretty darn weaponized.
Well, what is the proof of that? I just named you 3 cases where the Department of Justice is going after Democrats. And I mean, that's a very serious slur against the Department of Justice and the Attorney General.
I stand by that.
You stand by your slur then. Well, I would love us to have a complete hearing then on whether or not it's true, because I think it's wrong. And in fact, really, it's just setting the stage for Donald Trump to try to use the Department of Justice as an instrument of persecution against his political opponents, real or imagined.
Well, we don't know if Donald Trump's going to be president or not. Are you throwing in the towel, Mr. Raskin?
No. I certainly hope he doesn't try to steal the election the way he did last time. And I hope we'll
so
be
you're an
prepared this
election
time.
denier, Mr. Raskin.
Oh, no. I don't deny it. I affirm that Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. We know that happened. And yet, I hope you're not an insurrection denier, because you were there with me that day when they came in chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Do you remember that?
I remember January the 6th.
You remember them chanting, "Hang Mike Pence"? Them trying to overthrow the election?
Unlike you, I have never not voted to certify an election.
I'm sorry?
Didn't you vote to not certify the 2016 election?
The 2016 election, I simply spoke against irregularities. I didn't try to overthrow the government of the United States. I didn't try to get the vice president not to do his job, and I didn't even go to a senator.
I've always voted to certify elections. I just want to state that for the record.
So then you would agree then that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election?
I voted to certify the election. I've said that a million times. When the 50 states...
Did you say once that Donald Trump lost the election?
I have said that. When the 50 states certified the election was over. Now, we've gone over. Do you want to conclude? Let's get off of this. Good EPA.
I don't mind the diversion, Mr. Chairman. But let me just say this. On the question of agencies in America, let's be clear about what the Supreme Court did. What the Supreme Court said was, of course, the agencies can adopt rules and regulations. My friend from Colorado was really mistaken about that. the agencies, even under their terrible ruling, can continue to adopt and promulgate regulations and rules under the notice and comment process we have. But the Supreme Court then, in this amazing power grab, arrogated to itself the power to determine whether or not an ambiguous or silent statute should be interpreted this way or that. So it was a political power grab by the court. That's all that they did. But Administrator Regan is doing his job. The EPA is doing its job. The NLRB is doing its job. The Department of Justice is doing the job. They've got to adopt rules. The Congress told them to. So that was a power grab by the court against the Congress of the United States. Now, what's interesting about Chevron is that was a 6-0 decision that the conservatives supported because it was giving Reagan administration era agency bureaucrats the right to revisit the way that statutes were being interpreted from the 1970s. They pushed for it then. Now they're saying they don't want the agencies to have that power. In any event, the people of America want you to have the power to have muscular enforcement of our rules for clean air, clean water, and clean climate. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back.
Thank you very much, Chairman Burgess and members of the House Rules Committee. The Oversight Committee's February 27th subpoena required the Department of Justice to produce audio recordings of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur regarding the President's mishandling and improper disclosure of classified materials. The Department failed to produce them. The Oversight Committee held a markup to consider a report holding Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress and favorably passed that report. This is not a complicated matter. The executive branch and its agencies, including the Department of Justice, are not above Congress's right to oversee those agencies. We, as members of the House of Representatives, have a duty to ensure congressional subpoenas are fully complied with by those who receive them, people, companies, and particularly the federal government. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle constantly talk about the threats to our institutions, but then they turn around and defend the DOJ's noncompliance with a duly authorized subpoena showing their partisanship. If my colleagues will not defend the institution of Congress, the institution they are a part of, how can we listen with a straight face when they talk about the sanctity of our other institutions? The President has asserted executive privilege over these audio recordings. Legal scholars find this assertion bizarre and meritless. The President has waived any executive privilege over these audio recordings by releasing a transcript of the entire interview to the public. When the transcript was released, President Biden's own White House spokesperson claimed, quote, "In keeping with his commitment to cooperation and transparency throughout this investigation, the President declined to assert privilege over any portion of the report," end quote. My question to the White House is, what happened to cooperation and transparency? What reason does the White House have to inappropriately assert executive privilege now? The White House has shown it is willing to alter transcripts to protect Joe Biden's image. It is insufficient to simply take the Justice Department at its word that the transcripts have not been altered. The Department of Justice does not get to decide how to comply with the subpoena, just as the people who receive subpoenas from DOJ cannot determine how they will comply. The Oversight Committee has conducted its own investigation into President Biden's mishandling of classified materials, and its findings contradict key portions of the White House's and President Biden's personal attorney's official narrative. Months of investigating by the Oversight Committee have revealed the White House has attempted to withhold the truth from the American people. As I stated in our markup, the Oversight Committee's timeline begins well before the White House's narrative that President Biden's private lawyers just stumbled upon classified materials in November 2022 at the Penn Biden Center. By May 24, 2022, 6 months before the White House's story began, the White House counsel, Dana Remus, contacted a Biden former employee to retrieve President Biden's materials from the Penn Biden Center. She then traveled there herself to pick boxes up. Again, as I stated previously, and have not yet received an answer, why would the most senior lawyer at the White House be going to pack up an office that was supposed to only have pictures and personal documents in it?
Why were President Biden's personal lawyers visiting the Penn Biden Center days before the, quote, discovery of classified materials if they thought they were just picking up pictures and letters? Why were they calling FedEx to pick up boxes and a White House employee was leaving with boxes before the November 2nd discovery? These are questions I continue to ask because so far none have been provided. Not by Special Counsel Hur, not by the White House, not by the Department of Justice, and certainly not by President Biden. If the Attorney General chooses to defy Congress and not produce the audio recordings, he must face the consequences of his actions. The path before us is clear, and the Oversight Committee recommends the Attorney General be found in contempt of Congress. Neither he nor President Biden are above Congress's oversight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes, welcomes back to the Rules Committee, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very kindly, Chairman. Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired, and I apologize to the witnesses with his constant misstatements that the majority of this panel had anything to do with Project 2025. Honesty is not the ranking member's strong suit. So again, I apologize on behalf of this committee. You know, one of the things that's disturbing to me is when I go back to Kentucky, listening to my constituents, they want government to work for them. They feel like government isn't working for them. The policies aren't working for them. And the most outrage I've seen from my colleagues today wasn't over the billions of dollars that have been wasted, wasn't over the billions of dollars that we left behind in Afghanistan. It wasn't over the wide open border that's costing the taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. It was the notion of firing some bureaucrats, some fat cat bureaucrats. And, you know, that's the level of tone deafness I think that you see by my colleagues on the left. And to imply that the federal workforce isn't partial now. I mean, this federal workforce is populated overwhelmingly, if not nearly unanimously, by left-wing activists. And when you talk about about government, we have, you know, the judicial branch, we have the executive branch, and we have the legislative branch. But what's happened in a few years, there's a new branch of government, the bureaucracy. Government's too big. We need to rein in the size of government. One reason we have inflation, we have Biden-Harris inflation because the government has spent too much money. And there are necessary expenses of a government. It's necessary to fund Border Patrol. It's necessary to fund our military. It's necessary to fund social programs like food programs. I've always been a strong advocate for food programs. But it's not necessary to continue to grow these bureaucracies and to continue to hire these federal left-wing bureaucrats that will not comply with the directives of the American people. If the American people make a statement this election that they want a different kind of policy with respect to energy policy, is the EPA, the way it's populated now, situated and willing to comply with that new direction, the mandate that the American people say that they will voice? No, the answer is no. And, you know, Ms. Stansbury, I want to thank the witnesses for their transparency on background and policies. I appreciate that. Where's the transparency among my Democrat colleagues? What is the vision for the future for the vice president? All we know are the policies of the past. And the policies of the past, as we've outlined in this committee hearing, have been a huge failure, primarily to the American consumer who's having to struggle to pay for their grocery bills, who's having to pay more for rent, pay more for gasoline, pay more for every expense to the tune of $11,000 to $13,000 more per year for the same goods and services. The salaries did not increase $11,000 to $13,000. That's what inflation is. And we have inflation because of the bad policies of the Biden-Harris administration. I want to conclude with this. The ranking member mentioned the strong job market. His constituent, Jerome Powell, cut the interest rates yesterday by and I come from a banking background, by about as much as I've ever seen at one time. And he said the reason they did that is because of the weak job market. So at the end of the day, we need to, the weak job market that's was created with mass illegal immigration into this country that has had a negative impact on the job market. That's his word. So again, I want to thank the witnesses for being here today to talk about substantive policy. I appreciate your willingness to come before this committee. And with that, without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Questions, and I will begin. Just for the record, the Secret Service has an annual budget of around $3.1 billion, and I believe around 8,000 employees. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, there were many security failures on the day of the attempted assassination and leading up to that day. Let's start with the building that the shooter used to shoot President Trump from. At any point Saturday, did the Secret Service have an agent on top of that roof?
Sir, I'm sure, as you can imagine, that we are just 9 days out from this incident, and there's still an ongoing investigation. And so I want to make sure that any information that we are providing to you is factual.
You can't, okay. Why did the Secret Service not, can you answer why the Secret Service didn't place a single agent on the roof?
We are still looking into the advanced process and the decisions that were made.
Okay. Wasn't that building within the perimeter that should be secured? Do we agree with that?
The building was outside of the perimeter on the day of the visit. But again, that is one of the things that during the investigation we want to take a look at and determine whether or not other decisions should have been made.
One of the things that you said, I believe in an interview, that there wasn't an agent on the roof because it was a sloped roof. Is that normal, and do you fear that that immediately creates an opportunity for future would-be assassins to look for a slanted roof? I mean, this is a huge question that every American has. Why wasn't a Secret Service agent on the roof? And there have been reports that agents were supposed to be on the roof, but it was hot that day and they didn't want to be on the roof. Can you answer any of those questions, Director?
So I appreciate you asking me that question, Chairman. I should have been more clear in my answer when I spoke about where we placed personnel in that interview. What I can tell you is that there was a plan in place to provide overwatch, and we are still looking into responsibilities and who was going to provide overwatch. But the Secret Service in general, not speaking specifically to this incident, when we are providing overwatch, whether that be through counter snipers or other technology, prefer to have sterile rooftops.
Did the Secret Service use any drones for surveillance that day?
So again, I'm not going to get into specifics of that day in itself, but there are times during a security plan that the Secret Service does deploy an asset like a drone.
There were reports that the shooter used a drone just a few hours before the rally start time. Is that accurate?
I have heard those same reports, and again, am waiting for the final report.
Do you know, if you can't answer the question, that's your answer. But can you answer this? Do you know, I'm not asking yes or no, but do you know if the shooter used a drone before the shooting?
That information has been passed to us from the FBI.
How many Secret Service agents were assigned to President Trump on the day of the rally?
Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the numbers of personnel that we had there, but we feel that there was a sufficient number of agents assigned.
There are reports that several agents assigned to the rally on July 13th were temporary agents, agents not normally assigned to President Trump. Is that accurate?
What I can tell you is that the agents that were assigned to former President Trump are Secret Service agents that provide close protection to him, and that was what was actual on that day.
How many temporary agents were there that day?
Quite frequently, sir, during campaign events, the Secret Service utilizes agents from HSI or the Department of Homeland Security.
You don't know
to
how many?
supplement
you can't answer?
our plan.
Have the investigators reconstructed the shooter's precise movements over the past days, weeks, and months?
So, again,
We need to have confidence that if the FBI is leading this investigation, that they're leading a credible investigation, because there's some of us sitting up here today that don't have a lot of confidence in the FBI. So I will repeat the question. Have the investigators reconstructed the shooter's precise moments over the past days, weeks, and months?
I understand your question, Chairman, and I share your concerns about wanting to make sure that we have factual information. The FBI is conducting a criminal investigation. The Secret Service is conducting an internal investigation. There are a number of OIG investigations, and there is the external investigation that the President
Last question for me. Before July 13th, had the Trump detail requested additional resources?
What I can tell you is that for the event on July 13th, the details that were the assets that were requested for that day were given.
Okay. My time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been reported that
This amendment claims that Hunter Biden has cooperated with this committee's investigation. How has he cooperated with the investigation if he has not abided by a congressional subpoena? Abby Lowell has never discussed scope or logic with us, and we have identified at least 2 checks directly to Joe Biden where we traced the money directly through the Biden influence peddling schemes. That is a fact. We have published evidence. This isn't like Adam Schiff and the Steele dossier where you just make stuff up. We have produced bank records, and bank records don't lie. So Mr. Biden mocked our legitimate congressional impeachment inquiry and flew to D.C. to hang out outside of Congress and did not show his face for a deposition. He is not in compliance. He openly defied a congressional subpoena. Do any other members wish to speak on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Raskin.
I want to yield back to Mr. Goldman. Before I do, I just want to pose a question to you. When you said that there was documented checks involving the president in an influence scheme, are you referring to the auto loan repayment checks between Joe and Hunter Biden?
You mean the Porsche he got from Uzbekistan? Which auto are you?
I don't know what kind of car, but are those the checks that you're referring to?
The checks we're referring to were a check for $200,000 that came through the influence peddling scheme with AmeriCorps Health, and the $40,000 check that came through the influence peddling scheme with China, where I believe Mr. Bobulinski has stated publicly was a company that Joe Biden was supposed to be 10% owner.
Okay, I'll reclaim my time. I think in both cases, I mean, there were a lot of words there, Mr. Chairman, but I think you're referring to the auto loan repayment with Hunter Biden. You're referring to the James Biden repayment. But if you've got documented receipts of foreign governments giving money directly to President Joe Biden, that's an outrageous violation of the Emoluments Clause, like the $7.8 million that Donald Trump pocketed while he was president, which for some reason you guys don't care about because you think the Constitution only applies to Democrats and not to Donald Trump because, hey, that's an identifying characteristic of an authoritarian political party. It's got a charismatic leader whose word is considered above the Constitution, above the rule of law. You refuse to accept the results of democratic elections that don't go your way if you're an authoritarian party, and then you refuse to disavow or you embrace political violence as an instrument for obtaining and maintaining political power. So you guys didn't like when President Biden said that your party under Donald Trump has fallen into semi-fascist ways of operation. If the shoe semi-fits, you semi-wear it, okay? Now, I'd like to yield back to Mr. Goldman.
Would the gentleman yield to a question?
Well, yeah, I'll take a quick question.
I just want to clarify. We have a wire that went directly from CEFC, which banks have identified as a state-owned entity from China. That this wire went from CEFC to Hunter Biden, then to Joe Biden for $40,000.
Okay.
Joe Biden has been directly implicated in the family influence peddling scheme at least 3 times.
No, you haven't. You have not ever seen that.
You have not produced
read the bank memo.
You have not produced
the 40,000 is for Jim Biden.
No. The 200,000 is from Jim Biden. The 40,000 is from Hunter Biden.
All right, but please produce the
I look forward.
documentation.
We
I
have
think-
it. We have 4 bank memorandums.
Give it to the members of this committee and
4 bank memorandums.
Okay, I'll reclaim my
4.
time, Mr.
There
Chair.
has never been a more substantive
I'm saving my time. You go ahead, but I'm saving my time.
in the 7 years I've been in Congress.
All right, let me say this. The Democrats undertook a serious investigation despite every effort by the chairman to undermine it, and we determined there were $7.8 million documented receipts from foreign governments to Donald Trump. You guys don't care about that. That's unfortunate.
member yield?
But if you've got
Will
documented...
the ranking member yield?
Yeah, we will in just a moment. Let me make my point, okay? If you have documented receipts of foreign governments writing checks or giving credit card payments to Joe Biden, show it to us. We've been at this for a year now. We haven't seen anything. Then we show you in our more than 100-page report the documented receipts of money going to Donald Trump, but you don't care about it. In other words, you don't care about the principle that our government leaders should not be on the take from foreign governments. That's outrageous.
Well,
because I will oppose any government official of any political party who's on the take with money from foreign governments, and I hope you would join me in that. And yet we've shown it to you, and yet you guys don't care about it. I mean, that's just unfathomable to me. Now, at least the Trump family has responded to it. I mean, they're very nervous about it. You know what Trump said? The Trump's people say, well, he didn't take his $400,000 government salary. You know what? That's the only thing you're allowed to take is your salary from Americans, not money from corrupt Saudi monarchs who order the assassination of journalists, not from Chinese communist bureaucrats crushing the human rights of people in Tibet and the Uyghurs. You're not supposed to be on the take from those governments. That's what our Constitution says. Then they say, well, we return the profits. These guys think it's, well, if it's a hotel, they could just keep the money. At least the Trump family understands. Some lawyer told them what the Constitution says. We return the profits. Well, guess what? They didn't give us the accounting of the profits, and that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says you can't take any payments at all from a foreign government without going to the Congress of the United States. It's not that you can't keep the profits from foreign governments. Do you guys understand what you're doing here? You're putting that
Gentleman's
White House
time's
for sale.
expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Timmon from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleagues across the aisle missed the point here. The Trump family has pre-existing businesses built over decades, hotels all over the world, and President Trump divested himself of control over those businesses to his children, and business arm's length transactions between foreign governments and between the Trump International Hotel chain, there's actually an arm's length transaction. They're getting hotel rooms, they're getting food and whatever from these hotels. So the difference is this. The Biden family doesn't produce anything. They don't have anything. They don't have hotels. They don't have services rendered. There are none. Hunter Biden has said that he was on the board of Burisma and he has no qualifications. They actually cannot document any service rendered by the Biden family, whether it's Jim Biden, whether it's Hunter Biden. So that's the issue. The issue is that the Biden family, all they have is the big guy and his policy favoritism, and that's why we're here. And I just think y'all are muddying the water, and it's not doing the American people justice. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will yield to.
I thank the gentleman. I do want to point out that, to the point that Mr. Timmons was making, that the operation of the Trump Hotel was a legitimate enterprise that was approved by this committee in 2013, before President Trump was elected to office. But prior to that, it was the old post office. It was losing $6 million per year. The turnaround was a plus $3 million that went to the federal government. And as Mr. Timmons pointed out, it was divested to the family, to the children. It was not run by the president.
Will you yield for a question on that?
I'll yield for a question.
Well, when you say it was divested, are you claiming that Donald Trump surrendered any ownership interest? Because he continued to own it. He put it into a trust for his sole benefit. He said the day-to-day management would be turned over to his sons, but he was still the beneficial owner of it, and he stayed involved, as we know, because he kept talking about all the business that was coming in from abroad.
Well, the gentleman's question is legitimate in the context that most elected officials put their assets in trust for their own benefit after they leave office.
But it was not a blind trust.
He should not be forced to divest himself of the asset. an asset that was approved by this committee.
No, I'm afraid
Mr.
not. You're referring to...
I'm reclaiming the time yielded to me by Mr. Timmons to point out that what is happening right here should concern every American citizen, because we refuse to investigate, prosecute corruption. We are constantly pounded about corruption in other countries, but we've got corruption right here that we do not. We form partisan sides on this thing, and we don't do our job. I've been here 9 years and 7 days and gone through multiple hearings in the Oversight Committee dealing with corruption, and it turns into a partisan battle when we ought to be trying to make sure that we restore the American people's confidence in this government. What Hunter Biden should have done, he should have presented himself in answer to the subpoena. I'm not trying to take sides in this. I want the evidence to speak for itself, and it will never speak for itself if we don't have people come before the committee as they're required to do.
Will the gentleman yield for a question? Would you yield for one final question?
I'll yield to the gentleman.
Thank you kindly. And thank you for the spirit and the substance of your remarks, which I think significantly uplift the tone of the conversation. You would agree with me that the Emoluments Clause applies to government officials, and presumably you would agree with me that Hunter Biden is not and has never been a government official. So this is about a relative of the president, right? So we have Donald Trump, who's collecting $7.8 million at least. It's probably 4 or 5 times that much, and that's just during the presidency. But he was president.
Reclaiming my time.
And he was president.
It's Mr. Timmons' time.
Ranking Member, do you have any evidence that Donald Trump received any of this money you're alleging that was received by the Trump Hotel Organization?
Yes, he bragged about it, and in fact, he returned what he called the profits to the government, which gave the game away.
So $8 million in revenue, of which you don't know what the costs were associated with that, and you don't have any evidence that the president actually received any of this money. By the way,
we've got all the evidence. Have you read our report yet, Mr. Timmons?
What is the amount of money that you allege he's received?
$7.8 million, and it's a tiny fraction.
That's just factually inaccurate.
Have you read our report?
That's revenue. It's not.
I beseech you to read the report. I'll read any book you want me to read, any poem, any ghost story, whatever it is. Read the report, please. Read the report.
Please.
My time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. Before I recognize the next member, since Mr. Raskin's into reading, I'd like to submit to the record the last bank memorandum, that details the Chinese wire that went to Hunter Biden, then to Joe Biden. It's in the bank memorandum. This is substantive memorandum. This is the 4th memorandum. If you need the other 3, we will resend them to you.
Mr. Chairman, can I introduce something for the record, too, before we break?
Yes, but without objection, we entered in the 4th bank memorandum into the record. Now you have something, Mr. Raskin.
Yes, this comes from Newsweek. This is Republican Congressman Andy Biggs warns his party has, quote, nothing to campaign on.
All right, without objection.
I object.
Ordered.
I object. Has nothing to do with the subject at hand.
Oh, well, it was very much discussed by the members today.
I still object.
Okay, could I call for a vote on that then, Mr. Chairman? Yeah?
Yeah,
all right, thank you. Let's get our members to vote.
We'll do a... All right, all those in favor of entering into the record a new story, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. It's
a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman. Recorded vote.
Recorded votes called as previously announced. Further proceedings on the question will be postponed. We have votes coming up on the House floor. So, all right. Okay. We have votes on the House floor. Have they been called? They're going to be called in 30 minutes. Votes on the House floor are going to be called in 30 minutes. We will recess until the last vote has been recorded. Then we'll reconvene and take up the amendments and the votes.
Because it goes to the heart of the dispute that the chairman and the witness seem to be having, which is, where would his testimony take place? The chairman is insisting that it be done in a closed-door deposition, whereas the witness is insisting to take up the chairman's original offer to do this in a public hearing. And one of the reasons that the witness continues to push for a public hearing is the Devon Archer closed-door transcribed interview. That is one of only 2 transcripts of, I believe, at least 18 transcribed interviews or depositions that this Republican majority has released. But it gives us really, really good insight into exactly what the chairman and the majority would plan to do with Hunter Biden's closed-door testimony. Let's take, for example, just I think earlier this weekend, Chairman Jordan of the Judiciary Committee, also a member of this committee, said on television that the most powerful evidence of President Biden's wrongdoing is the testimony of Devon Archer. So I wonder what is that testimony that is so powerful? Was it the testimony of Devon Archer when he said that President Biden was never involved in any of Hunter's business ventures? Or was it the testimony that President Biden never received any money from Hunter's business interest? And remember, Devon Archer testified he was Hunter Biden's primary business partner. He was on the board of Burisma with Hunter Biden. So he had firsthand knowledge of all of Hunter Biden's business deals. Now, maybe if it wasn't those, it was the fact that President Biden, according to Devon Archer, never received any bribes from the Ukrainian government. In fact, maybe it was even that he said that President Biden never discussed business with Hunter Biden or Hunter's business associates. It must be that he was focusing on the times when President Biden met or spoke to Hunter Biden's business associates. That clearly has to be what the chairman was talking about. So it must be that when you look at the transcript, what he was referring to is when Devon Archer repeatedly said that they never discussed business, that they only talked about, quote, niceties, including, and this is according to Devon Archer's testimony, how the weather was, and that none of the discussions ever related to business. So the best evidence that these Republicans want to put forward is testimony that completely absolves President Biden from any involvement, association, benefit from, or other interactions with Hunter Biden's business interests. Now, Chairman Comer, you were asked a few weeks ago on CNN what you thought the best evidence was of wrongdoing by President Biden, and you said that the allegations of the bribe from the Burisma founder, should we call it, I guess, the Burisma hoax now? Because unlike with Russia's interference in the 2016 election, which Special Counsel Mueller unequivocally determined was known to the Trump campaign, was welcomed by the Trump campaign, and was used by the Trump campaign, in this case, Vice President Biden's urging Ukraine to fire the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, which was consistent with official U.S. policy. It was consistent with the European Union policy. It was consistent with a bipartisan Senate delegation who urged it as well, was actually bad for Burisma, and therefore it was bad for Hunter Biden. And who should we look to determine whether that is the case? How about Devon Archer, the star witness, who was also on the board of Burisma? Nope. Devon Archer said that it was his understanding that Burisma had Shokin, the Prosecutor General, under control, and that getting rid of him would have been bad for Burisma. And of course it was bad for Burisma, because as soon as Shokin was gone, after he had allowed a British case to lapse, the next Prosecutor General came in and did start investigating the founder of Burisma. So it turned out to be exactly correct. This is why Hunter Biden wants to testify in public, is because if you had not released that transcript and we had just relied on the false representations of the majority members of this committee about what Devin Archer said, we would never have known that Devin Archer actually absolves Joe Biden of any involvement of any wrongdoing related to Hunter Biden's business interests. And we would not know that this entire investigation, the public would not know that this entire investigation is a complete sham. And I yield back.
The minority will have 4 minutes. The majority has 10 minutes. I'll go first. I must oppose this amendment, but I have to state something. And I want everyone to understand this. A lot has been said about people on this committee running to the press during a deposition or during an interview. During the 2 main interviews of this impeachment inquiry investigation, the Devin Archer interview and the George Burgess interview, the very first person on this committee to run to the reporters was none other than Dan Goldman. That is a fact. Does anyone want to dispute that right now? The very
I would like you to
person.
identify one thing that I said that was not consistent with the transcript.
You're talking about you are talking about running to the press and leaking.
Why don't you release the Burgess transcript?
You said Hunter Biden didn't want to come because of leaks. You're the leaker. You are the leaker, Mr. Goldman.
You do your
now,
check.
You
I
have
say
4
the
minutes
truth.
remaining.
You
This is
give
my
false
time. You're out of
information.
order. You're out of order. I'll let you sit there and regurgitate your baloney for 6 minutes. I oppose this amendment. This amendment strikes the entire section about why Hunter Biden's testimony is necessary for the committee's legitimate oversight investigation. The amendment discusses a single deposition with Devin Archer and gets rid of all other relevant information as to why his deposition is important. The amendment distorts the reality of how the committee has handled this investigation. Devin Archer has stated publicly that claims made by the Democrats in this amendment are categorically false. Specifically, Devin Archer stated that Democrats' claims that President Biden was not involved in Hunter's businesses in any way was false. Devin Archer said that's categorically false. He said Joe Biden, quote, was aware of Hunter's business. He met with Hunter's business partners. I recommend that all members of this committee oppose this misguided amendment, and I ask to submit to the record Devin Archer's interview where he says one Democratic claim about the Biden business is categorically false, and that was what I just mentioned with respect to Joe's involvement, knowledge in his businesses. Without objection, so ordered. Now, the minority party has 4 minutes remaining. Chair recognizes Ms. Stansbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just very quickly want to clarify that when I mentioned that the majority had run to the press and misrepresented what happened in that interview yesterday, the point was that they misrepresented what happened in the interview. And I know that for a fact because somebody shared with me the text message that the Republican staff sent around all the members. And I also heard directly from the press what was said. So that's what we're talking about here is misrepresentation of the facts. And with that, I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very much. And but I'm fascinated by this exchange because most committees I've been on, when the transcripts are released, it serves the vital function of transparency, but it also keeps people from misrepresenting and distorting the facts in advance. But if you withhold all but 2 transcribed interviews, I think there's something like 16 or 17 that haven't been released by the majority, then that does become an incentive to misrepresent and distort. I don't blame Mr. Goldman if he ran to the press to try to get out the true story before others go out and tell a lie about what's taking place if we're not going to turn the transcripts over. And I wonder whether you, Mr. Chairman, could commit to turn over all of the transcribed interviews to
the gentleman yield for a question
and to the Congress and to the people of the United States of
America.
America. Yes, by all means.
A question?
Yeah.
Does the ranking member presume that his Republican colleagues intend to lie about transcripts?
But
you seem to have that presumption.
What I will presume is based on the facts that there have been multiple distortions and misrepresentations in the past, and the vast majority of the transcribed interviews have not been released. Someone give me the exact numbers, but I believe only 2 transcribed interviews out of 17 or 18 have been released. I've never seen that before, and I'm baffled by it. I don't understand it.
In the ranking member's esteemed background and knowledge of judicial affairs, when there's ongoing investigations and multiple witnesses in complex cases, isn't it common for full transcripts to not be released?
No, it's not.
Within the parameters?
No, but I don't think so. But in any event, we're talking about some that took place 6 months ago, 8 months ago. But somebody's going to give me a list of how many we're talking about here. There's 17 total. Only 2 transcribed interviews have been released. So then it does become a race to get out to say, you know, what you think happened. Why don't we just give the people the transcribed interviews? We talk about transparency and accountability. That's the dominant theme of this committee. Isn't that something we can agree to?
Will the ranking member yield for 1 minute?
Yes, by all means.
I yield.
I have a question for the ranking member. If it is generally the practice of an investigator to withhold all of the transcripts during the investigative phase, would that normally also include releasing 2 of them?
Well, that strikes me as odd. That does look like, you know, the famed cherry picking. It's as if to say, well, 2 of these interviews helped us. 15 or 16 of them don't help us, so we're going to bury them someplace. So that's odd, but I want to presume the best of my colleagues, Mr. Higgins, and that's why I'm asking the chairman to explain what is the practice here.
Well, you complain that we don't release transcripts. You complain because we do release transcripts. Honestly, we released those 2 transcripts because you had misrepresented so much what Devin Archer said. That's probably one reason he went on Tucker Carlson's show to call you out for misrepresenting what he said in the transcribed interview. But
so you are able to get them ready. You are able to get them ready, in other words, and you thought that it was
we have other witnesses
important.
to interview. You know how it works, Mr. Raskins. You know, you're playing like you don't know how this works. You're playing and trying to act like you've never done an investigation before when you've led both impeachments in the January 6th.
I didn't lead the first impeachment, but
I wouldn't want to admit to leading that first impeachment either.
I would have 10 nicknames from President Trump by now if I'd led that one.
Well,
but
you got, I think your all's time is pretty much expired. Does anyone on our side have anything to add? I don't see anything. So, who's that? Mr. Gosar.
Yeah, you know, we talk about facts. It wasn't U.S. policy to do what Biden did in Ukraine. The Obama administration actually said that Ukraine had complied with the law and that the loan should go through. Yes, they did. And that the vice president changed it on an audible over there. So the other thing I want to point out is if the president didn't know anything about Hunter Biden's businesses, how do you explain the 14, 15, 16, I can't remember now, how many times his partner actually went to the White House? How do you explain that? How do you explain this guy, Devin Archer, shows up at the White House? Who are you? Normally, the person's going to say, well, I'm Hunter Biden's business partner. That's typically what the average person would say. So how come you didn't know anything about that?
Mr. Gosar, for the 6 people in America who are still watching or hearing, could you just explicate what you think the presidential crime is?
Oh, I'm just saying right now, we're just talking about the facts. The facts here are misplayed. I mean, you complain about us, I'm going to complain about you because you're distorting the facts.
For 1 second?
I'll give you a second.
Mr. Gosar's time.
Just, I'm not going to ask you to take my representation for it. I would ask you to go read the transcripts of the State Department witnesses in the first impeachment who were in the Ukraine embassy and in the State Department and were the ones who created and made the official U.S. policy, who all testified that Vice President Biden was acting consistent with official U.S. policy.
Okay, well, that's not what we received. And when you start looking at this, you know, the courts, you know, I know the ranking member always goes to the courts. You know, you had a judge that basically said this honeypot of a deal for Hunter was no good. No one was going to get that. How do you explain the slow walking, you know, by the Justice Department on the IRS claims? And how many people get a chance to do that?
Well, with the gentleman yield, that's a great point. And when the courts ruled against Hunter Biden, I don't think you heard a single complaint from anybody on our side of the aisle. We said, let the justice system proceed. But when the court said that the January 6th committee was validly and constitutionally composed, we still have people today who violated their subpoenas who are whining about how the committee is illegal. I mean, come on. I mean, how do you feel about that one?
Could I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, why did you all not hold them in contempt?
Hold who in contempt?
The people that didn't.
Oh, we didn't have time at that point. I mean, we got up to the very end of the Congress.
I was just wondering.
But if you want to work on it now, let's do it.
No.
I'm totally with you, Mr. Chairman.
No. I was just curious as to why you didn't. All right.
Well, let's make it bipartisan.
I'd like
Everybody
to
good?
that
We're
we
square?
hold anyone who's violated
No, I was just wondering. I mean, that's a tool that Congress has. If someone, you've been on TV several times saying that people should honor congressional subpoenas.
And I
when
believe
they don't, you hold them in contempt.
Whether it's Steve Bannon, Dan Scavino, Jim Jordan, or Hunter Biden, if somebody is.
But you did hold
if
the other two.
I'm sorry?
You did hold those two of those in contempt of
We
Congress.
did. Well, Steve Bannon's been convicted by a jury, by a court. He's been convicted in
Department of
court.
Justice
And
went
still,
after
I don't think we
him.
could get a single person on your side of the aisle, other than Ms. Mace, to utter a word about people who violated subpoenas in the last Congress. I mean, that's extraordinary. And all that I've been saying about Hunter Biden is he accepted what was your original offer. You didn't like that offer anymore. You put out.
Let me say this, and then your time's expired, and we're going to get to the vote. Hunter Biden is more than welcome to come for a hearing after the deposition.
Okay, you didn't say that before, but that's cool. You've changed the offer.
Chairman, hold on. Will you
No,
guarantee
the time is
that there
expired,
will
Mr.
be a
Goldman.
public
You
hearing?
have talked and talked.
Will you
and
guarantee
talked.
that there will be a public hearing if he were to come in?
After the deposition, I
You
guarantee.
say right now
Yes.
you will have a public hearing
Yes.
with Hunter Biden.
Absolutely, we've said that. All right.
Yeah, I know. We heard a lot about public
Okay.
hearings that have
Very
not
good.
happened.
The question on the amendment.